So if you could, Mayor.
Appreciate the opportunity to come before you again today with respect to this issue. And in speaking with councilors, both individually and collectively as a group, it was clear that there were questions regarding the current conditions of the site and the process for redeveloping the parcel, and how do we ensure sort of the health and safety issues that were expressed in prior public hearings. And in wanting to provide as much information as possible. You may recall at the last meeting we had the licensed site professionals here, both Webb's LSP and the city's LSP, Weston and Sampson. Those individuals are back here again today. But we also thought it would be important hearing some of the questions and concerns, both from members of the public, but in particular from the council, that we invite representatives from the EPA. And I'm thrilled that we have both Doug Guttrow, the Director of Government Relations and Community Involvement for the EPA Region 1, and Kim Tiza, the EPA PCB Region 1 Coordinator. We have been working with Kim on this site going back to the actual cleanup, and I think they're both available to provide some context to what's been done and their role going forward in terms of any cleanup or further actions on this site. And I've used this term cleanup, and I've been corrected by some of the LSPs and by EPA that it is more of a soils management and construction project, but I think hearing from them could certainly give you an additional sense. I'd be happy to invite Doug Guttrow, Director of Government Relations and Community Involvement, and Kim Tiza here to talk a little bit more about their role. And I really want to thank them for being here. Kim's probably spent more time and effort on this project than she cares to, going back to the actual remediation, but also thank them for coming out to an evening meeting to provide some context and hopefully answer questions and concerns and put to bed issues with respect to cleanup or remediation on the site. I should also make sure folks know Webb's has submitted some additional information since the last meeting to the city clerk, some context of some other cleanup sites in Salem, some additional clarifications on some of the comments and remarks that were made at the last meeting. So I'll end there, and thank you again, Doug and Kim, for both being here.
Thank you. Mr. President, members of the council, pleasure to be here. Madam Mayor, thank you for the invitation as well. As the mayor said, my name is Doug Guttrow. I'm the head of government and community relations at EPA's New England office that is in Boston. We cover the 6 New England states. We deal with 1,100 municipalities, and for me, it's always a great part of the job to have an opportunity to come before city councils and meet with mayors, particularly because outside of my job at EPA, I served for 14 years on my own city council. I served 10 years as a ward councilor, so I see the world through that lens, 4 years as a councilor at large, and 2 years a term as a council president. So we at EPA have a couple of folks that have that lens through which we look at things, and we know the issues that are important to you all, or at least we hope that we do, and we bring that perspective to that. So, as I said, we work with 1,100 cities and towns throughout New England. We have an opportunity to work very closely with our state partners on a variety of different issues. We have a long history here in Salem. I know that I've been here personally with prior regional administrators meeting, announcing beach grants events with Mayor Yusevich, and then we've been very closely aligned with Mayor Driscoll on a variety of redevelopment projects, but particularly here, my involvement and my team's involvement. My team does a lot of the community involvement work and deals with many elected officials around Universal Steel. Probably dates back to 2009 or before 2009, when we participated. The mayor called together a meeting of EPA, DEP, and Mass Development to both navigate the liability and facilitate the cleanup at Universal Steel to allow the temporary use as a commuter parking lot. And as I said, we work with many cities, and in my experience, I find that Salem takes every step necessary to keep its residents safe and protect local taxpayers from liability. So that's something that I think that not only the council but the residents here should take into consideration. So EPA has several programs that have touched the site, Universal Steel, the 1.2-acre site, under 3 different federal environmental statutes. They're known as CERCLA, the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act, also known as Superfund. They did what's called a short-term removal action at the site. Our Brownfields program, which you probably hear, invests in assessing as well as providing cleanup monies at a number of sites across the Commonwealth and across the country. and the Toxic Substances Control Act, which is really Kim Tisa's expertise. She's our PCB and TSCA expert. So just a little bit, a snapshot of what we've done. And I know that many of you know, and I have actually a fact sheet that we passed out a number of years ago around Universal Steel that I can pass out to the council just to refresh you. It provides a little bit of background on some of the work that we've done historically on the project. But the removal authority that we have under CERCLA allows us to do emergency removal, short-term removal actions, as well as what are called time-limited removal. And it allows us to spend up to $2 million of federal funds to take care of issues fairly quickly. And that's what we did here originally after that meeting where we met with Mass Development, DEP, and our brownfields folks, TSCA folks, and removal folks. So during EPA's time here, we spent $2.2 million in costs, and Mass DEP incurred $748,000 in costs relative to the removal actions. 8,990 tons of PCB contaminated soil and debris was excavated and removed. During the removal actions, there were approximately 33 tons of metal debris that was collected, segregated, cleaned to PCBs and recycled. And in addition to the cleanup work that took place, other activities that took place during the cleanup work were air monitoring and dust control, conducted extent of contamination sampling, maintained security fencing, implemented erosion control procedures, coordinated with our TSCA program for approvals. As I said, we excavated 8,990 tons of PCB and metal contaminated soil debris, transported and disposed of 5,334 tons. The remaining 3,600 or so tons were transported and disposed of by Mass DEP, and we conducted and disposed of 1,080 gallons of PCB containing lubrication material. The site was backfilled and restored and excavated areas. In addition, we used our brownfields funding. MAPC, Metropolitan Area Planning Council, was awarded $1 million for a coalition assessment grant dating back to 2009. And from that grant, $75,000 was used for additional assessment activities such as a hazardous material survey, wetlands permitting, and predisposal soil characterization. So moving forward, the authority that pertains to the site has to do with TSCA, and with that, if Kim has any comments, she can provide some comments, or if there are any questions, we're happy to take those. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for asking us to be present to answer your questions. I just want to clarify and add a little bit more to what Doug expressed. Certainly EPA did a lot of removal work, but as part of the restoration of the site for its use as a short-term parking area, there currently is on the site roughly anywhere between 1.5 to 3.5 to 4 feet of clean fill that sits upon contaminated material that EPA did not remove. We removed as much as we could, but we got to a point where we just couldn't get any more out. But most of the concentrations at that site that remain beneath that 1.5 to 4 feet of clean material is relatively low concentration PCBs, which is a good thing, so EPA was able to remove a lot of contamination from that site. Sitting on top, of course, is clean asphalt, which I believe the city did lay down to allow its use as short-term parking. Mayor Driscoll was correct. I did want to clarify that we are not viewing this proposed use by Webb as further cleanup. What really it is a soil management plan that would deal with soil that would have to be excavated as part of the development work. Putting into play there would also be work that we had previously done, EPA had previously done, which was requiring air monitoring to ensure that the site is safe, any management of water that's generated, appropriate management of soils on the site, whether it's on-site or off-site disposal. So I want to ensure you that anything that we would want to see as far as oversight here to control dust, control water, is certainly we've been discussing thoroughly with Webb as well as both LSPs of record for the site. And I think Doug and I would be glad to take any questions you may have at this point.
Any members have any questions for him? Councilor Milo.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a quick question. What kind of oversight does EPA provide to a project like this?
This is what we call a state lead site because this site is regulated not only under the federal PCB program because of the PCBs there, but there are also contaminants that are regulated by the state. So it is a state lead site in terms of having someone physically at the site, their LSP, but EPA would be in constant communication with the LSP, with the state to ensure what we've agreed to as far as the air monitoring, management of soils, waters, whatever, is properly done. Visiting, doing inspections, et cetera, but we do not have anybody 24/7 at the site or while work is transpiring. That is the LSP's job.
Okay, do you have some kind of a sense of how often you'd visit? Does it depend on the length of the project or how often you communicate? And
I would look at, we would have at least weekly updates.
Okay.
That's generally part of any package, especially where there's a lot of community interest in the project, where there's residential properties. Certainly, anytime that there's issues with water or traffic or whatever, we would want to know about that. But I would see certainly weekly communication. If there's issues that we need to visit for a specific purpose, we would do that. I think it's more of we would visit as needed. That's the way we would normally, because it's one of 6 New England states. I can only be at so many sites so on a daily basis.
And, Mr. President, through you, just one final question. Do you also respond to residential concerns? Like, how does that piece work?
If a resident has a concern and they want to give us a call, certainly we're constantly on the phone with people who have questions. I deal with residents, I deal with property owners, everybody. No one is, what I say, exempt from speaking with me. Yeah. I was just on the phone with a resident tonight, so not here, but another site. But yes, anytime there are questions, feel free to call.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Sargent.
Thank you. Right now, is that considered a capped hazardous waste site?
I don't define the term hazardous waste site. It is a contaminated site. Under the state, under RCRA, it may be termed a hazardous waste site. Under me, it's different, but it is a contaminated site, yes.
But it's considered capped right now?
Well, it is capped because there's clean soil on and clean asphalt, yes.
So there's an asphalt cover on it. Is it accepted by all the state and federal agencies as being, being capped or covered or sealed?
The state and both EPA and the state believe the site is properly controlled at this point, yes.
So at this point now, there's nothing that the state could ask us to do if we left it as is. There's no more cleanup that the city would have to do, is there?
Well, right now, we're viewing that as a temporary cap,
Right.
so it's not really completely closed out at this point.
Right, so it's, when they finish it up, you didn't sign it off? It wasn't
No,
signed
because
off, it's
right
sealed?
now, all we've done is a removal action at the site. There are still PCBs remaining there that are regulated for cleanup, so we haven't completely closed out the site under TSCA yet.
So there's still cleanup that has to be done?
I didn't say that, but we have not closed the site out as yet because it's currently owned by the city, but we have not issued a formal approval to completely close out the site at this point. Again, because it wasn't clear what's transitioning. This was just a short term that EPA did for the city, but I have not completely closed it out under TSCA yet.
If we left it as is, would you be able to sign off on it?
I think we would be looking at, we would have to come up, no, because there are still some additional conditions that would come into play. There are requirements to record deed notices on the property. There are long-term O&M requirements for the cap. So there are some encumbrances that would be necessary on the property going forward if the city were to remain responsible for it.
All right, such as activity use limitations and things like that, right?
That's a deed restriction, yes.
So there would be deed restrictions and all that, but there wouldn't be any more cleanup that would be required if we left it capped, and kept it sealed.
At this point, neither the state, and I hate to speak for the state, but they're not here, but Frank certainly is the LSP that could speak, and as well as Felix. I'm not aware that there would be any further cleanup that would be required, and when I say cleanup, that means soil removal.
Right. That's all I'm trying to get at, is if we left that as is, I'm just trying to get it, we don't, the city doesn't have to do anything more. It's cleaned so many feet down, capped, sealed, there would just be paperwork involved.
And long-term O&M requirements for the asphalt cap.
Right, which makes sense, of course. All right, thank you.
Okay. I'll ask one question briefly, if I could. What sort of, in terms of construction on that, and if further construction were to happen on that site of any sort, what kind of processes would need to be used for containment or whatever that would normally be found acceptable?
You mean as far as dust measures,
Well,
controlling dust?
either measuring and monitoring or containment, or removal or anything. I'm just, I'm just curious to hear more about what would have to go into any further removal to make sure that that is acceptable and to make sure that is safe.
Both the state and EPA have discussed with both LSPs what we would want to see as far as dust monitoring, which would certainly be around the perimeter of the property, action levels established, methods for water control and off-site disposal if necessary, and what their requirements would be for management. In other words, if they have to manage the soil on the site, how that's going to be properly managed and controlled. Dust suppression methods, which we've already discussed too. The implementation, some of the details are still in the design phase, but we certainly conceptually, all the components that I just spoke about would be part of that final plan that we would approve.
Okay, and just as one more follow-up to that, from that same, I guess somewhat related standpoint, right now, in accordance with the temporary use that was approved, there is no real significant drainage set up on there. It's basically just a simple paved over spot. Were that going to remain the case, would we have to be making accommodations for things like drainage of water off the site and all the like?
Oh, I know that some drains were put out along the street. I'm going to have to refer, because I know that part of this was done as part of the city's work and EPA's removal work, which I don't have all the details as far as where all the drainages were, but I know that there were some along the street out front, which is Bridge Street, thank you. I know there's some there. I don't know if there's any additional water concerns at that site. I haven't heard of any that would require some additional water controls, but if someone has indications of that, certainly we would like to know about that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from members? At this point? No, if we're, okay, if we're all set with that, I'll thank you guys for coming and being able to answer some questions for us. Mayor, anything you want to add before we open up reopen the public hearing?
No, I just want to be clear on the timeline. I think since we are at the beginning of the session, and again, thank the EPA, one, for their help cleaning this up. The site is in much better conditions now than it was when this work started, and that wouldn't have been possible without these resources. And so we definitely appreciate that. And I hope people have a better understanding of the work that not only went into cleaning it up, but the work and oversight that will take place going forward should anything be constructed on this site. There is a health and safety plan that must be followed. We've talked about how we make sure we're doing our part to monitor that even more fully beyond the work of the EPA, keeping our LSPs on, throughout construction to make sure that the work that Webb's does is done in compliance with that HASP as sort of a belts and suspenders. But I just want to make sure councilors are clear. This is our opportunity. Certainly you could call the EPA, but they did come out to give the assurances that work is going to be done in a way that's going to ensure that the neighborhood is protected, to ensure that any type of activity that's taking place. We've had meetings here before where people were concerned about their kids playing in their yard, or it is a neighborhood that has a lot of families, and the EPA, part of their role is making sure they have the oversight on the construction activities to ensure that folks are protected. And I think that's vital, that We recognize that there's a lot of eyes on this, there's a lot of information, there's a lot of work that's been done, but anything going forward will be done in a measure to ensure the health and safety of the welfare of the people, especially those living closest by it.
Counselor Milo?
Thank you, Mr. President. Through
A shredded grain tarp on the mountainside.
to,
And that was put up by EPA, and it's still hanging there, and it's really an eyesore. It was in the back of 102 Federal, and it's on the mountainside, and it was put up by the EPA for pollution. I think the people around here know about it. And it's still hanging there, and it's shredded, and it looks terrible eyesore.
I'm sorry, but first off, we're not in a public hearing right now, and also, this is not, contrary to what may seem, this is not a session for people, for just ask anything of the EPA. They were brought in here specifically to address questions of the city council, and if you have concerns over something or else, you can send them to us and we'll pass it on, or you can send the mayor and she will pass them on to the EPA for specific questions. But, again, this is not, right now, this is not for people we're not going through the room taking questions of the EPA right now. We're just, going through to talk between the city council and the mayor and EPA, and then we will reopen the public hearing for you to make comments to the city council. So, Councilor Milo, you.
thank you, Mr. President. Through you, just a quick question to the mayor. You mentioned in your comments just now, our LSP. Do you mean the city's LSP?
Correct.
So we're going to have our own LSP in addition to AEG? Is
So
that?
we do have our own LSP, and we will continue to have our own LSP. So the Weston and Sampson folks who were here at the last meeting are the city's LSP. Felix from Allied is Webb's LSP. So we have our own licensed site professional who we've been working with throughout all of the cleanup of this site, the prior work going forward. They're also playing a role of sort of a peer review on the work that Allied is doing in terms of their health and safety plan. So maybe this is a good time to sort of just unpack a little bit how that works. And I'll allow my experts to make sure that I'm not saying anything incorrectly or inaccurate as we go through this. Webb's is proposing some construction activity. They will have to file a health and safety plan and lay out the process. How are we going to manage soils? How deep are we going? Are we using piers on slab? Are we doing different construction methodologies? All of that will be reviewed by Felix and Allied to submit to the EPA, and our LSP will be serving as sort of a peer review. One, so we can get a handle on what some of those extra costs are. We want to make sure we're cognizant of that. But also, so that's our eyes looking at this. Well, how are you going to monitor dust control? They're the most familiar with that site because they were the LSP of record during all of the cleanup work that was done with the EPA and the DEP. So we have a second set of eyes reviewing the health and safety plan, the construction methodology, to ensure that we're doing all that we can to limit intrusions into the neighborhood, to ensure that we're doing all that we can to minimize any, potential opportunities for health or safety issues to become issues. Going forward, generally, you would end that relationship. A plan would be approved, and the contractor would go, assuming everything goes forward, the contractor would go forward. What we have talked about, and it frankly came about during some of the conversations with counselors, is maybe we want to keep Weston and Sampson on board even a little bit longer so that they can monitor some of that work going forward. So we'd have the EPA doing their job, we'd have the LSP and a very qualified Webb's team doing their job in compliance, but we'd also have a second set of eyes kind of monitoring. They're not going to necessarily be on site 24/7, but making sure that all of the requirements in that HASP are lived up to, that if there are issues, we'll have somebody that we can turn to make sure they're being addressed adequately.
Right, thank you. And that was my question. I was wondering going forward if they would be.
That is not normal, to be fair. We normally would have our peer review cease at the point where the HASP is approved and the work is starting. But given the concerns that folks have, we thought it might be money well spent to involve Weston and Sampson in it in sort of a monitoring role. There's rules that will have to be followed. And that's not to say that we think Greenleaf or Webb's or Allied are not capable, that, you know, from all accounts, everyone is really committed to the same mission of doing this work as you know, this important work in a manner that's as least disruptive as possible. But it's nice to have belts and suspenders. We know how close the neighborhood is to the site, and we want to do all that we can and to assure that issues, if there are any, will be addressed right away.
Thank you.
I think Councilor Fumiko?
Thank you. Two questions.
Sure.
One, I believe would be through to you. So you just touched on drainage a bit. We all know, at least the council and Salem residents, that right along the perimeter there, we have quite a problem with a little bit of water when it rains. More than a little bit, you can't drive down the street. Could you touch just a little bit on that again, as the drainage and the EPA and how this would all tie in?
Well, I know that part of the discussions has been drainage as part of the redevelopment. Again, I have not seen all the final plans, or I know that we did get some additional ones today, and we were talking about how the drainage would go. I think we have to make sure that in doing that drainage that we don't overload anything that's already existing, or new drainage, because I believe there's some new drainage that's also supposed to be put in on that street. So I think those are further discussions to have as part of the development piece. Because I'm not an expert in controlling drainage waters. So we depend on engineers to make sure that it's designed appropriately and the systems aren't overloaded.
Can I just add one thing onto that, Counselor? I think the other part of this project is it's still very much in the works in terms of what construction methodologies will be used, where the building will be situated. We're at the beginning of the dialogue. As you know, this has to go to site plan review. That will include civil engineering, drainage, design, all of the areas around site plan, from noise and buffering and landscaping and traffic, access in and out. That falls under site plan review when the council starts there. So there'll certainly be another component around engineering and design that, again, this health and safety plan will probably remain a draft until that piece is really put together, and we know exactly where buildings are going and how wide and tall and, you know, layout, et cetera.
One more question. I don't know who this would be to. What prevents, say this goes through, what would prevent Webb from walking away if all of a sudden the cleanup costs went beyond whatever a set TIF is, so that all of a sudden they're middle of it and they're not going to leave it uncapped and say, see you later?
Yes, a really good question. And we talked a little bit about this. I should point out, since the last public hearing, we did have an opportunity to meet with abutters. We direct abutters to the site that we called in, that we requested come, so we could spend a little bit more time talking about issues, particularly for folks who live right next door to the site. The ward councilor were there. We also invited the Weston and Sampson LSPs there in case there were specific questions around the cleanup. So let's assume this process moves forward in the way that it's been laid out. The council would vote on the zoning change and the disposition in favor of it. The next step would be for Webb's to then go file with the representative boards they need to, both the Planning Board and the Conservation Commission. That entire time, we'd be owning the property, so although the zoning change had taken place, the city would still be holding title to this property. The deed change wouldn't take effect until after all permits were issued, and then we normally have a land disposition agreement spelling out exactly what you're going to do on that site that would coincide with the approvals granted by any of the permit boards, as well as any other state or federal agencies that needed to weigh in. So that really is our check-in. If for some reason Webb's decided we're not interested anymore. I mean, when they went through the permitting process, it became too costly of an endeavor, you know, whatever those conditions were that were being placed to put on them. We would not have sold that property, you know, to them at that point in time. What would prevent them in terms of once they took that property over from stopping in the middle? We would still have an LDA. We'd still have a land disposition agreement saying your right to the property is based on completion of the project that was laid out. So certainly, you know, I think they're a company that has undertaken this sort of project before, probably not on a site as complex as this one, but if they receive their permits, I think we're going to know whether they're going to be in compliance or not, or able to complete it. And certainly that LDA and that land transfer doesn't happen until all of those pieces come together.
So once the land, if it were to be dug up, and they all of a sudden notice there's more contamination than they had thought, is there any written agreement that says they cannot walk away, that they have to finish it, and that we're not on the hook for whatever bills.
So I guess I,
For EPA, is there any sort of protection that, once it's opened,
and I think the one thing, I think you guys can speak to that process a little bit. The one thing that's all in our favor is there's a pretty good assessment about where things are in that parcel. Everyone's done a lot of work already to date. So the surprise, oh my gosh, we didn't know it was this much or this quantity or where it is, probably very unlikely given what we do know. But there certainly are requirements once you're a landowner not to leave property in a hazardous condition. And I don't know if there's anything else you guys would want to add to that.
We have been discussing with both LSPs really what's going to be generated as part of the current proposed development work, where footings would go, how deep, et cetera. As I previously said, most of that site is covered by 1.5 to up to 4 feet or so of clean material with the asphalt. My understanding is based on what's currently being proposed, the grade will go up a little bit higher. So for the most part, whatever is going into the ground, the piers, the footings, most of that material, most of those structures are going to be in clean material. They won't be generating contaminated material. There are some areas where it's going to go below and into contaminated material. So based on EPA's work, I don't expect to find a surprise with all the samples that we collected and did. I don't see that we're going to get. And I never say 100% on anything, trust me. I'm of one of those opinions, nothing's ever 100%. But is it more likely than not that there's not going to be any surprises? I'm going to hang my hat on the wall and say yes, based on how much work that we did there and understanding exactly what the development at this point is proposed to entail as far as going into the subsurface to put in footings and piers. Again, a lot of them are going to be in the clean material. We know that's not dirty. So that's why I'm saying I'm pretty confident with that piece of it. As far as liability, once Webb takes over the property, at least under TSCA, and I'm not going to speak for Circular or even the state requirements at this point, I'm strictly speaking for the TSCA PCB regs, that becomes a strict liability statute, which it is. So the bottom line is whoever owns that property, given that they have knowledge of site contamination, they would be responsible for management of the PCBs at the point of ownership.
thank you.
That was one of our hesitations on taking this property, was until we marshaled the assets together to help clean it up. Because frankly, we're in that chain of title as it stands right now.
Just to add one thing.
Please.
Every week, I mean, because we're in New England and the industrial past of New England, every week in our agency and in every state agency, there are municipalities like yours that are contemplating redeveloping contaminated sites. So the states usually have the lead. In your case, you've got extensive work from now 3 programs within EPA, as well as the state working on it, and the leadership within the city on it. As Kim said, all eyes are on this property to get it right. And, you know, Kim won't toot her own horn, but we've had several mayors say to us that they would hire her for her expertise. She does a remarkable job. You know, there are some communities that have PCBs in a number of different places. And, you know, if I were to have anybody on any project, it would be Kim Tisa, because she's meticulous in terms of ensuring that everything is done right and everybody's kept safe in the process. So
That puts so much pressure on me.
I do.
Councilor Mello.
Thank you, Mr. President. Through you to, I'm not sure whom. If you can just give us a sense of, there's some discussion about, or I think there was some discussion about what the term "no significant risk" means and how that's defined. Can you give us a sense of like what these terms are, what this site might be defined as, and what that means in terms of risk?
That's
Or
not, I'm
somebody?
sorry. I will bow to the LSP. I don't use the term "no significant risk." That's not my repertoire. What I look at is how do I properly manage the site and the best way to minimize any risks.
Okay.
That's what I do under my program, and that's what we would be doing in terms of ensuring proper dust control and air monitoring to make sure that any work that's done on that site is not impacting surrounds. I'll leave it to
Kim, can I ask you
You
just the context of these sorts of sites, and they exist?
Mm-hmm.
How many of these are you working on? How many, you know?
I have done work in rural areas, in congested areas, you name them, PCBs are ubiquitous. Everybody knows and knows the term PCBs. Trust me, I go to the next door town, I'll probably find them there. A lot of the sites today, we have to understand that because of the ubiquitous of PCBs, there's no such time sometimes as a term green space or clean space, and you have to deal with what you got. We deal with contaminated property all the time, redeveloping contaminated property, and when I say redeveloping contaminated property, that doesn't mean that we're gonna clean it and then redevelop it. It's redeveloped in its contaminated form, understanding that as part of that redevelopment, the protections that we put in place to ensure that any development that occurs is not going to be a problem with the contamination that's left. So we do it all the time. This is not a new road you're going down. I just want to emphasize that. You may not, have been involved in a lot of them, but it's not new to us. Brownfields, we do it all the time. Super fun, it's constant. And my program, I've got sites all over the place. So it's not new to us.
So, no significant risk is a term that's defined in Massachusetts under the regulations, Massachusetts contingency plan. No significant risk basically means that when you're doing a remediation, if the conditions at the site would cause one person in 100,000 people to have a chance of getting cancer, then that site does not pose no significant risk, or still poses significant risk. So you have to continue doing remediation or eliminate pathways that people are exposed to the contamination so that you establish a condition of no significant risk. And that's for human health. There's 3 other categories too. There's public welfare, safety, and the environment. And those have all different definitions of no significant risk under the regulations. For public welfare, it's like, are there big holes in the ground? Are there drums? Are there things that are unsafe? So you have to evaluate those conditions as well. And then for the environment, does it pose a condition of no significant risk to bugs and bunnies, those types of receptors as well? So it's kind of 4 different things that we evaluate to say it has no significant risk. In the condition that the site is in now, it poses no significant risk because it's capped, and there's no exposure pathway to anyone that's coming onto the site, okay?
And then the goal-
That's state regulations.
That's a state Massachusetts term.
Okay,
Okay.
and then I'm guessing that the goal of the web project is to,
Continue.
right,
Yeah.
okay.
Yep. And as Kim said earlier, there's going to be a plan that goes into Kim for the soil management aspects. And then when it's done, there will be a plan or a report that's submitted to DEP that documents everything, that there's a condition of no significant risk and it's safe for Webb to operate on that property.
Is
Okay?
that like the highest risk or the lowest risk that you can have? Is there something, I mean, there's no such thing as no risk.
No risk.
but-
There never is, because there's always background conditions.
Yeah.
So there's, in terms of local conditions, you're gonna have fill, that people used coal and coal ash or other types of fill.
We got it all.
Yeah, it's just urban fill. I mean, there's a book called Gaining Ground. I forget the author's name, but it talks about the filling of Boston area. And it's unbelievable how much stuff is just built up land with
Right,
fill.
right.
So it's kind of a ubiquitous thing, and we try to evaluate what those background conditions are when we look at sites, because the DEP and even EPA doesn't mandate that you have to clean up to cleaner than your surroundings, because now you're cleaning up the entire universe of fill. So we just try to mitigate the risk, get to a condition of no significant risk, and then that meets the regulations.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Any other questions by members? Councilor Sargent.
Where's there more of a risk? Leaving it as is or disturbing it?
I think what we're shooting for is even if you disturb it, you can still achieve a very low risk, if at all, because again, what you're dealing with is when that cap comes off, when the asphalt comes off, most of what you've got is all clean soil. And that's the purpose of developing air monitoring and dust suppression to ensure that there's no pathway for exposure off-site.
Well, with groundwater's about 5 feet down.
That's correct.
So you have to go down more than 5 feet to make a solid base for a building to stand on, right? So your footings have to go into that groundwater below it to bedrock, or some kind of solid footing, right?
There are a couple of areas that we may, or that they may be, because we've spoken about where exactly do you think we're going to be in groundwater, and they're trying to figure out a way to design the foundation to minimize what groundwater, or how much groundwater we would have to impact.
But
Yes,
they-
or get into.
Based on the square footage of the building and the weight that's gonna be upon the cement base, there has to be there has to be a grid of cement pillars pushed down, you know, below the water to hold it. How many do you estimate there will be?
When I spoke with Greenleaf today, I believe there was somewhere in the neighborhood of around 500 concrete columns or stone columns that are going to be driven through and into the subsurface. Now, as part of that, my understanding is that those types of designs you don't have to excavate the soil. The stuff is driven down through it, so we don't have to go in and excavate like you would with a foundation wall or something like that. So that is an advantage, if you will, of that type of structure. So what you're going to end up having is really your slabs sitting on pillars and footers.
Right. So there'll be like 500 of those have to go on into
I didn't
there?
count them,
I mean,
but you can ask Greenleaf about that one. I didn't sit there and count them on the map.
Give you 400. So if only 400 go in, that's 400 piles that have to be driven into that ground, and I don't know how many times they have to be banged to piece, but just the noise alone throughout the neighborhood would be difficult and take a while. But I can't imagine that won't disturb some kind of dust or create some kind of, you know, something in the air.
Well, again, I go back to what's at the surface is clean soil. So I really need to emphasize that. So even if there's a little bit of dust generating around, and I say that loosely, I don't expect, given the dust suppression that I want to see on this site, because I've been at projects where we've had house demolitions because the houses were contaminated, soils underneath, and we actually had house demolitions. And we used dust suppression, and believe it or not, we never exceeded really what I call really low standards to ensure that there were no issues to surrounding neighborhoods. So in this case, what we're really dealing with is clean dust at the surface, so there could be a little disturbance. But what I want to see is enough measures put in place and enough monitoring so the neighbors don't have cause to be concerned.
I'm just getting at is what's more of a risk to the neighborhood, the environment, leaving it as is or working on it? Because working on it creates, you need monitors to work on it.
That's right.
You don't need monitors there every day to use it as a parking lot.
Well, I don't think you can say what's more of a risk one way or the other, not from a health standpoint. If you're talking about, some type of noise in the short term, those
Just
types of
noise.
things.
Talking about disturbing the site.
Again, I go back to you're dealing with clean dust. It's not really a health issue at that point, at least as far as I'm concerned from a contaminant standpoint.
So as far as health risk to the neighborhood, leaving it as is and building on it is a wash?
Leaving it as versus building on it is a wash.
Is a wash as far as the impact on the environment and the neighborhood and
To be perfectly honest,
health risks, that kind of thing.
to be perfectly honest, as I said, we are involved in these types of projects all the time, and I think the risk associated with redeveloping on it, the risk can be managed in such a way that you really are not seeing any health risks at the site during development, versus leaving it in place. That's just my opinion.
All right. And with that being said, you wouldn't need the monitors. You wouldn't need people to monitor it then, right?
As far as leaving the asphalt there,
No, as far as during the construction. You wouldn't need anybody to monitor it environmentally.
I want to monitor it anyway. I'm always one that does suspenders and belts. I'm always over conservative to ensure that I've got the data to support that those construction activities aren't a problem. And you want to control dust anyway, regardless of whether it's clean or not. Your construction activities should not impact anybody, regardless of whether it's clean or dirty.
Okay. Then the other thing is that the PCBs that are in the groundwater, and as they rise and fall with that groundwater.
The PCBs were identified in one area of that site in water, as well as I recall. And it was in an area where the contamination in the soil was extremely high. It was localized. We have done, or the state did groundwater monitoring off-site, and we have not seen any contamination that's migrated from that site. And as I said, we've removed really thousands of parts per million from that site. The highest concentration that remains at that site, based on EPA's data, was around 400 parts per million in a very small area of the site. Over in this corner of the building, I can't remember if it's north, south, east, or west, but it's over in one small area. Everything else at that site is very low concentrations. PCBs are not soluble in water to any point worth mentioning. So if they're migrating, it's generally in particulates at the site. And we have not seen, as I said, we've monitored, or the state's monitored groundwater, and we have not seen anything leaving the site.
All right, thank you.
Councilman McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. President. Through you. Just briefly, I mean, obviously, we're talking about, correct me, remediation of soil, or not remediation, we're talking about management.
Correct.
There you go. All right. Now, let's go take a big giant step back. Can you categorize how the removal went? I mean, obviously, I know that it was stated it was an emergency. We came in, we were looking for the funds, 2 million initially, emergency funds, demo buildings, whatever. Can you characterize how that whole process, till we got to the point where we have a asphalt site? How did that go? How did the monitoring go? Were there issues, concerns, incidents? I don't know how you describe it. I don't want to put words.
I was not on site all the time. We have a removal program manager that was there. He really took over as part of all that work. Frank Riccardi, the LSP for the city, certainly was there a lot. But I did ask for and got what our air monitoring results were as part of the removal work. And when I looked at the numbers that we had, the numbers were low. They did a really good job with the air suppression, with the dust suppression that I saw, and they said that they really did not have any exceedances of what they call their action level, which is the number they establish that we put in place to ensure that there's no impacts to off-site folks. So all those numbers look good, the ones that I saw.
And so, for the most part, then you would categorize that everything went smoothly for the most part?
Pretty good, except
considering it was a
for,
demo site and
we found a lot more contamination, I think, than what we thought we were going to find, if you want my honest opinion.
then everything that's left on site, we've identified and you know where it is.
Based on the data we have, yes, I think we do, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions from the councilors for any of the members of the team here, or?
And I'm strictly peace, and again, for PCBs, I would ask that you speak to the state, or have the LSP to speak to the state, any contaminants left there as part of the state work.
Thank you very much for coming in to speak to us.
Thank you.
Thank you. With this, we now move back into public hearing of the city council relative to declaring a parcel land as surplus located at 297-305 Bridge Street, Lot 1, containing 52,491 square feet, parcel B containing 1,260 square feet, and parcel A containing 2,035 square feet. We have already begun this public hearing. This is a continuation. When we last let off a couple of weeks ago, we had a group of approximately 10 or so people who still had expressed that they wished to still address us. Just for reference, if you already have spoken to us on this matter, you won't be coming back up again this particular time because you've already spoken at this public hearing. We do have public hearings following this on the other subject matter, on the discontinuance of Beckford Way and on the actual sale itself. So if you want to speak on those matters, or if you've already spoken on surplus and want to speak on one of these other matters, when we open the public hearing on those matters, that's when your chance will be. So again, we will go, we had people, all the people who spoke in favor at that point had spoken. We were taking people who wished to speak in opposition. So I'll start over on this side, and again, people who have not yet spoken in opposition to this, you come up and in order, state your name and address for the record, and then you have approximately 5 minutes to say whatever you wish to say about this particular subject. We'll be keeping time, and hopefully we'll try and let you know when time's up, and hope you can wrap it up at that point so we can keep things moving. So again, just to remind everybody, this is not the portion of things where we make all our decisions. This is not where we have our own debate on the matter and decide what we're going to do as a body. This is simply a process in which we want to hear from you in the public and hear your opinions on this, so we can all take this into account in our deliberations. So that said, we'll start over on this side of the room, and if you haven't already spoken on this, raise your hand and you can come up and have a turn with this. So, name and address for the record, please.
Thank you.
And if you have any materials, please pass them out as well. So.
Hi, my name is Lisa Spence, and I live on River Street. I also spent roughly 15 years conducting human health risk assessments for 2 consulting firms in Boston, in addition to doing environmental epidemiology work at the Boston University School of Public Health. I am opposed to declaring the former Universal Steel site surplus for many reasons, but I will focus my comments on the environmental health issues and AEG's proposed plan. I'd like to discuss the Weston and Sampson risk estimates for this site, but first need to address something the Weston and Sampson LSP Frank McCarty said at the last meeting. Weston and Sampson noted an error on one of their data tables in Appendix F of their RAP. The table was in parts per billion rather than parts per million. Frank then stated, the good thing is that we included this in the risk assessment, meaning that the risks were overestimated. While it is true that the Haley and Aldrich data in this appendix table were in the wrong units, the risks were not overestimated. The error was confined to the appendix table. In their risk characterization, Weston and Sampson evaluated 2 PCB soil concentrations at the former Universal Steel site, 26 parts per million and 4.6 parts per million. These values were calculated from existing average soil concentrations that were adjusted to account for variability. Using only the most recent PCB soil samples, I get 25 parts per million. If the Haley and Aldrich data had been evaluated in the wrong units, the exposure point concentrations would have been closer to 1,000 parts per million. So we can be certain that Weston and Sampson did not overestimate risks. Now let's consider the risks. The estimated risk from exposure to this site, pulled from Weston and Sampson's own risk characterization. Keep in mind that their characterization used soil data for what's at the site right now and evaluated only those contaminants that were detected above background levels. Weston and Sampson evaluated some of the risks to hypothetical future residents if a home were built on the site. They also evaluated risks to a park visitor, indoor and outdoor workers, and construction workers. The risks estimated were too high for everyone except indoor and outdoor workers. It's because of these risk estimates that the site is capped, and there is an AUL on the current deed. For a hypothetical on-site resident specifically, the risk estimates were too high for every exposure they evaluated: accidental ingestion of soil, touching soil, or eating vegetables. Regardless of whether they considered short-term or long-term exposure, regardless of whether they evaluated possible cancer risk or non-cancer health effects, all were too high. For example, Weston and Sampson found that a hypothetical residential toddler between the ages of 1 and 2 who ingests a tiny amount of soil every day for 3 months would be at almost 8 times the acceptable risk level. How tiny an amount of soil? 4 thousandths of an ounce, an amount easily picked up by a lollipop that falls on the ground. These were just the estimated non-cancer risks, not considering cancer, not considering skin exposure, and not considering inhaled dust. These high risk estimates are why the former Universal Steel site can't be used for a home, and why the nearby residents are concerned about any uncapping in construction. Even more concerning were Weston and Sampson's calculated risks for eating produce grown in site soil. Again, the risks they estimated were so high that this kind of activity would not be allowed at the site. Based on Weston and Sampson's risk estimates, adding just an ounce of soil to 50 pounds of clean garden soil would still result in unacceptably toxic vegetables. The neighbors are left to wonder how much dust from this site will ultimately settle on neighborhood yards, on our pots of tomatoes, raised beds, and grapevines. We are talking about backyards touching the former Universal Steel site with children playing and gardens growing just 30 feet away. The risk calculations for this site provide the numerical backing for residential concerns about the project. The neighborhood has already been exposed over the 60 years of Universal Steel's operation, abandonment, and all subsequent cleanup activities. This is a critical point. The top two contaminants of concern accumulate in the human body. PCBs and lead are neurotoxins and probable carcinogens, and it's just not fair to ask neighbors to endure additional exposures to these pollutants. During the last meeting, AEG's LSP, Felix Perillo, made some dramatic assurances about dust. And someone who hasn't worked on a brownfields construction project might have been reassured. But a few things don't square with Felix's picture of this construction. First, I feel we actually had a best-case scenario in the last cleanup. It was EPA doing the work, and they were completely focused on the cleanup, not doing construction at the same time. Secondly, as someone who works on brownfields construction sites every day, Jerry Jennings knows all too well that dust elimination is completely impossible. This will be a construction site, and air monitors do not stop dust. Thirdly, the use of PM10 air monitoring won't measure all of the dust in the air, just the part that can be inhaled. We need to be really clear about exactly what these air monitors are measuring and how they are going to do it. And in the process, I'll explain what PM10 means. Air monitoring for dust is generally designed to measure only the fraction of dust that's small enough to get deep into a person's lungs when they breathe. Those particles are 10 micrometers in size or smaller. Collectively, this fine dust is referred to as PM10 for particulate matter that's 10 micrometers or smaller. For reference, a human hair is 50 to 70 micrometers wide. But at this site, we're actually interested in knowing about all the dust and particulates, regardless of size, that leave the site. It's true we'll only inhale the smallest particles, but it's also true that we'll ingest anything we breathe in that doesn't make it into our lungs, and that even the heaviest particles that may remain airborne for only 30 feet will land in someone's yard. To continue with dust, the air monitoring plan presented by AEG in their health and safety plan has 3 air monitors to measure PM10 dust, but the results from one monitor will be subtracted from the results of the other 2 monitors. The intent is to subtract that background dust, but the real-world application is fraught with opportunity for error. First, we have to trust that someone is keeping track of wind direction at all times, and that whichever meter is chosen as background actually is background. That seems questionable. For example, there will be a lot of machinery on this site. If a backhoe working near the background monitor drops a pile of soil, the resulting measured dust at that monitor won't be counted as site dust. It will be counted as background dust and subtracted from the other measured amounts. What if the background monitor is adjacent to Bridge Street and traffic is kicking up extra dust because site soils have been tracked out by machinery? Again, if the background monitor is by the road, this road dust measurement will get subtracted from the other dust measurements. This option seems destined to underestimate the fraction of dust leaving the site that they are able to measure. The erosion control practices in the Soil and Groundwater Management Plan don't specifically address the tidal flooding that everyone who uses Bridge Street has experienced. I'm predicting the next flood for noon on Thursday, March 10th. The silt fencing on hay bales along the perimeter of the work area may be helpful for heavy rain, but the direction of water flow will be quite different during tidal events. Further, I'm concerned that PCBs attached to organic matter in the groundwater will rise with groundwater during these events, and over time, PCBs will move from the lower, more contaminated soil up into the clean fill below the liner. Any PCs absorbed to organic matter moving in groundwater would not have been detected at this site because the groundwater samples have been filtered prior to analysis. We do know that at a minimum, AEG hopes to stockpile and reuse approximately 1,600 cubic yards of site soil taken from the shallow locations that are minimally contaminated with PCBs, which for this site includes PCBs concentrations below 10 parts per million. Weston and Sampson's estimate for a hypothetical park visitor specifically evaluated remaining shallow site soils. You may remember that exposure point concentration for PCBs I mentioned of 4.6 parts per million. They found that exposure of a hypothetical park visitor to even these shallow soils would result in unacceptably high risks. So even though the soil stockpiled around the site for the 2 or more months of construction will have PCB concentration below 10 parts per million, they cannot be considered safe. Perhaps most telling of all, and seemingly written with Jerry Jennings in mind, is AEG's Health and Safety Plan disclaimer. Any general construction work in the AUL areas containing PCB-impacted soils will require proper personal protective equipment. Since PCBs bioaccumulate, it is imperative that workers avoid all exposure to skin and eyes and avoid any potential for accidental ingestion by wearing at a minimum gloves, goggles, and a Tyvek suit. Strict adherence to this plan will reduce to a minimal level but not eliminate the potential for harm from impacted media at the site. Therefore, AEG cannot and does not guarantee the health and safety of on-site personnel or individuals who may come in contact with site soil or groundwater. Finally, I'd like to briefly comment on the comparison of the former Universal Steel site to the Carlton School and the Witchcraft Heights School. Each of these schools had to get cleaned up and capped, period. I understand the Carlton School had just been demolished in preparation for the new school when contaminants were discovered, and an imminent hazard was discovered at Witchcraft Heights. The city didn't have an option in either case, just like the Universal Steel site had to get cleaned up enough to be capped. Now the city has an option, the option to retain site ownership, leave the cap as is, and collect parking revenues. The city doesn't need to allow construction at the former Universal Steel site. It's not a school in need of a cleanup. And if the city does allow construction, it will certainly not be to clean the site further. Another big difference is that PCBs are everywhere at the former Universal Steel site, in 97% of site soils tested at closure. PCBs were fortunately not a factor at these schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Please hold your applause, people. This is a hearing for public comment, not a rally. And also, again, we allowed Ms. Spence to go on substantially longer. We would prefer not to be doing that for everybody, and we would also prefer not to be using the gavel to make people stop. So I would really appreciate if you could keep your comments to approximately 5 minutes. Thank you. Name and address for the record.
My name is Meg Toohey. I live at 122 Federal Street. I oppose declaring this land surplus for the compelling reasons you've already heard. For a number of years now, our neighborhood has been concerned about why we have so much illness and cancer, and we have discussed it from time to time. We didn't fully understand the risks that the site posed for us until we received Webb's bid and the LSP's report in March of 2015. This report came after the most recent cleanup in 2012 and 2013, for which we have not received any reports. So if there are reports available from the EPA or from MassDEP, it would be very helpful to have them. The report made it clear, this is the LSP's report attached to Webb's bid, made it clear that even after a $3.5 million cleanup, the AUL on the site, which said no residential use, actually meant that no individual could be on the site for more than 16.8 hours per week. The important information that was contained in their report made us realize just how dangerous the site has been to our neighborhood during the last 10-month cleanup that ended in 2013 and during earlier cleanups. In fact, for over 60 years, we now realize that the neighborhood was exposed to PCBs from the daily operations of Universal Trading Company, which included assembling electrical transformers, a major source of PCBs. I should note that once the RFP and Alliance report were received in March 2015, well after the cleanup, we repeatedly asked the city for further information and asked to participate in the EPA meetings. We did not receive any further information, nor were we permitted to participate in the meetings with the EPA. In the course of reviewing the EPA report dated October 2015, which was provided to the council and to us at the beginning of February, several of us re-looked at the history of illness in our neighborhood. The report included a MassDEP map that had two circles, one with a 500-foot radius and one showing a 1/2 mile radius. We'd like to share with you what we know about illness experiences by residents within the 500-foot radius. I want to be clear that this is anecdotal information, but once you hear it, I think you'll better understand our concerns. We were able to gather this health history for the area within 500 feet of the site over the last 25 years, based on what we knew about each other and our neighbors. That includes parts of Federal Street and Federal Court, parts of Beckford, and parts of River Street. Of the 18 people on this list who suffered serious illnesses, 15 lived on Federal Street and Federal Court. The extraordinary list of illnesses, including some that are quite rare, represents only 13 houses within 500 feet of the site. The list includes middle-aged, long-time male resident, prostate cancer, woman in her 70s, long-time resident, diagnosed with late-stage uterine cancer, died. Middle-aged professional woman diagnosed with primary brain cancer, died. Long-time middle-aged male resident diagnosed with wasting muscle disease, died. Abutter to an abutter, 10-year-old male child who stopped growing, diagnosed with a pituitary tumor of the brain at age 11. The mother was told by a top neurosurgeon at Boston's Children's Hospital that she should complete an environmental exposure survey. At that time, we had no idea about the contamination at the site. The child lived at this house since infancy. The child also had severe asthma and early childhood neurological motor problems. Young mother, mid-30s, with 3 children, diagnosed with lymph node positive breast cancer, died. Young mother, mid-30s, with 1 toddler, diagnosed with malignant brain tumor, died several years later, leaving a 1- and 3-year-old. Longtime middle-aged male resident, direct abutter, diagnosed with lung cancer. Abutter to an abutter, elderly gentleman, longtime resident, diagnosed with malignant melanoma, as well as another rare and aggressive skin malignancy. Abutter to an abutter, resident for over 40 years. Bone marrow makes insufficient white blood cells, which are important for a healthy immune system. Direct abutter, longtime first-floor resident, died of throat cancer. Direct abutter, second-floor resident and wife. Wife gave birth to twin girls that had multiple congenital deformities and developmental delays. Direct abutter, male resident with primary cancer of the liver. Surgical treatment successful, also diagnosed with prostate cancer. Active health-conscious nurse, late 50s. Diagnosed with late-stage cancer of the stomach, died. Abutter to abutter, middle-aged female, diagnosed with severe asthma following environmental cleanup of 2012-2013. Cannot leave house without a rescue inhaler, no prior history of asthma or respiratory problems. Longtime elderly female resident, breast cancer. Longtime elderly resident diagnosed with prostate cancer and primary bladder cancer. Direct abutter, middle-aged, longtime female resident diagnosed with breast cancer. While this list of known illnesses in 18 people who live or lived within 500 feet of the site is not scientifically linked to the site, it's nonetheless compelling. We won't know the health effects from the 2012-2013 cleanup for a long time. Can we afford to wait? Can we afford to risk further exposure to substances that are cumulative in the body? For those of you who don't understand why we didn't express our concerns earlier, it's important to know that at no time during the cleanups did we understand the extent of the contamination and the amount of PCBs at the site. For the most recent cleanup, which began in December 2012, there was one meeting on June 15, 2012, to which neighbors were invited by Lynn Duncan for an update on the planned cleanup and the plan for the parking lot and future development. EPA, Mass DEP, Mass Development, and Weston and Sampson attended. No written information was provided. The meeting was not recorded. There was no Board of Health meeting regarding the cleanup. The handouts that directed residents to keep children inside were distributed at a later date. At that time, we obviously did not have the benefit of the information provided by Webb's LSP, which alerted us to the severity of the contamination on the site. I hope you understand why we're so concerned about the health effects of the contamination and why it is so important to our neighborhood that we experience no further exposure. Keeping the site capped and using it as a parking lot is the highest and best and safest use of this city-owned parcel. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dewey. Go up.
Dave Williams, 342 Essex Street, Salem. I think what you're considering to do right now, or in this process, I think you have to have a very significant, compelling public interest. If what you just heard from Meg Toohey and from all of the other folks who've talked about the potential health risk, I think that is very clear. I wanted to quickly, I've got some back of the envelope numbers that I just wanted to run through about some of the more pragmatic aspects of this. I don't think you'd get an answer from the EPA. I think Councilor Sargent was trying to go after it, but I think if I'm not mistaken, what I heard from the EPA is insignificant or otherwise, there is some additional risk towards the development of the site than there would be if it was capped, if it was left capped and as a parking lot. So if we can just talk for a few minutes about the pragmatics here. These are all figures that came from the city's website. As has been discussed before, the potential tax revenue generated from this site from FW Webb is estimated to be $100,000 a year. The TIF reduction for the first 10 years is estimated to be about $40,000 a year, which leaves us, simple math, about $60,000 in tax revenue generated by the site over the first 10 years. If using the city's numbers, on what the parking lot revenue generated for 11 months, it's actually 46 weeks, those numbers come in at roughly about $33,000. If we add an additional $4,000 some odd dollars to that for the 6 weeks that were left in the year that were not accounted for, we come up to almost $38,000. So the difference between that $38,000 and the $60,000 in revenue potentially generated in those first 6 years, from my perspective, is minuscule. Now, $100,000 is certainly nothing to sneeze at, but if we look at $100,000 in terms of the $144 million budget that the city has, it's reasonably insignificant. It's less than 1/2 of 1%. It's not a lot of money that we're talking about. So I think you have to take this into consideration, this compelling public interest. Is there a compelling public interest to leave the parking lot for future parking? As I said, I live on 342 Essex Street. In 2 blocks of my house, I have 2 churches. I have 2 libraries. I have 3 museum houses, the Witch House, the Ropes Mansion, and the Pierce Nichols House. There's Hamilton Hall, there's the YMCA, and most of all, there's the new courthouse. When they built the new courthouse, there was a significant amount of neighborhood discussion about the impact on parking on Essex Street. I have all on-street parking on Essex Street, as most of us do. There's a few of us who have driveways, but most of us have on-street parking. At that point in time, the state assured us that since this was a consolidation of all the courts, there would be no additional impact in terms of generation from more use. So there would be no additional cars. Despite the fact that we're moving from one end of Federal Street, where there is a parking lot, where the district court was, to the other end of Federal Street, where there is no significant parking lot, or at least the time the MBTA lot was being developed. Now, what the state forgot or neglected to mention was that, one, the Superior Court building and the old Essex County Court building, the one on the corner of Federal and Washington Street, they're going to be disposed of by the state and by the city at some point in time for development. So that is going to add extra or additional requirements for parking in the neighborhood. When the probate court and the family court move back to the Registry of Deeds building, that is going to require additional parking requirements in the neighborhood. Now, I have no reason to, I think the numbers that the city came up with seem awfully small when they were talking about this 46-week usage period. It's about a 12% utilization, which seems really small to me, and it may be because instead of looking at just Monday through Friday, that you looked at Monday through Saturday, and one has to wonder whether there's actually a lot of potential for parking on Monday through Saturday. So if we go through the positives of the potential, there's 121 parking spaces there. At $4 a spot for a 12 to 14-hour day, which is the rate, I believe, at the city parking lot at the MBTA stations, $1 more in the parking garage. That comes out to $125,840, which is $25,840 more than the tax revenue that would be generated by FW Web. Now, that's at 100% capacity, which probably we won't get, but one would assume that with this increased demand on parking, even at an 80% capacity, it matches and slightly exceeds the revenue potential that FW Web will generate in terms of taxes. So once again, I think FW Web is a great company. I'm probably one of the few people who've actually bought things in your counter store. They've been a good neighbor, but there is this compelling public interest for the development of this site just simply does not exist. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person, please. Again, name and address for the record, and
Erica Spanger Siegfried, Amesbury, Massachusetts. I am a senior analyst with the Union of Concerned Scientists. In that capacity, I specialize in sea level rise and coastal impacts. And I specialize in that really for spending the first half of my life here in Salem. I have a handout. I thought handouts were not part of the package, so I'm going to have to ask you to pass that around gradually while I make my brief remarks. My intention is not to provide comments on the specifics of the project, but rather to explore with you whether the best available science is being brought to bear in your deliberations. And to do that, I want to shift gears and maybe pick up where our EPA friend left off with the matter of water control measures, the questions surrounding that. So I'm here to do basically one thing, and that is to talk about a problem that's being faced by communities up and down the East Coast, but one that is also specific to the site in question, and that is the problem of the growing reach and frequency of tidal flooding as sea level rises. I can't cover these things in 5 minutes. That's why I've shared this with you, but I would really love to follow up with anyone who has questions, and I do have some relevant reports here. So Bridge Street, and specifically the stretch adjacent to the project in question, floods. Everyone here knows that, and it floods with increasing frequency. This flooding is exacerbated when high tides coincide with rainfall, it's true, but floods happen without rain. Rain is not the reason that this area has become a hot spot for flooding. The underlying reason is that sea levels are rising, and as they rise, the ability of high tides to reach further into our communities increases, and the ability of storm drains to drain and flooded pumps to work properly decreases. And in this location, both of those trends are really heating up at the moment. The science is pretty straightforward. A lot of you may know it inside and out, so I'm going to be brief. Tides vary. Depending on whether we're experiencing a full moon or a new moon, those tides can rise higher or fall lower than they normally do. They always have done this. But of course, the people of Salem in the 16 and 1700s would not have put Bridge Street, would not have constructed it the way they did if it flooded every month or every other month. It did not. It does today. And the reason is sea level is rising. As you can read in the National Climate Assessment, it's risen about 8 inches globally since 1880. It has risen substantially more in locations along the East Coast. We actually, unfortunately, are a hot spot for sea level rise globally. We're seeing some of the fastest rates in the world according to federal data, Boston has seen 6 inches of sea level rise just since 1970. So when you add that kind of an increase onto normal tidal fluctuations, it's much easier for higher tides to reach onto roadways, into yards, into basements, even homes and businesses. And they're doing that. They're doing that in Miami and Savannah and Charleston and Norfolk and Annapolis, the Jersey Shore, Queens, Portland, Maine. This problem is being faced everywhere on the East Coast in low-lying locations, just to varying degrees. Because of the sea level rise that it has seen, Boston is flooding roughly a dozen times a year in locations that when it was constructed did not flood. Here you see that kind of flooding, at least in the location in question. So where is all this going? Sea level rise is accelerating, and it's poised to rise steeply in the decades ahead. People often say, oh, you're talking about sea level rise in 2100. That's when it's really at a point where we have to be concerned. But no, I'm really talking about 15 years out and 30 years out. And yes, I'm also talking about sea level rise in 2100 and even beyond. But for a city like Salem that's been around nearly 400 years, both of those are material, both of those matter. So to be specific about some of the projections, flood-prone areas around Boston, including the one in question, 15 years from now should expect flooding around 30 times a year with no rainfall. In 30 years' time, the lifetime of a home mortgage, we can expect approximately a foot of sea level rise. With that, flood-prone areas can expect to flood more than 70 times a year, again, with no rainfall. In my opinion, though, really proper analysis would need to be done of this location because it's quite possible that those Boston projections underestimate what's happening here. As you can see from the maps in my handout, as at least one person in this room can see from the maps in my handout, as sea level rises, the land area that gets flooded also increases. So with 2 feet of sea level rise, the road outside of Webb would flood with every high tide. With 3 feet of sea level rise, most of Bridge Street from the overpass to Lynn Street would flood with every high tide. With 4 feet, basically the entire property in question is underwater with every high tide, as are large swaths of other parts of the city, as I know that many of you here are aware of. Globally, we should expect 4 feet of sea level rise by 2100, but locally we should expect it sooner. And that's obviously something we need to be planning for. But land doesn't need to flood with every high tide. It doesn't need to flood twice a day for us to determine that we can no longer use it the way we had historically used it, or that we need to make major investments if we're planning to continue to use it over the long term. A look at the science suggests that we need to be asking ourselves those questions today. The point is that in 2016, if you want to make a sound long-term decision in a coastal area, you need to base it on sound sea level rise science. As the Obama administration now requires, if you want federal funding for a project in a flood zone, and as the state of Massachusetts urges. I think that you all know much of this. It's not just the feds or the state that are urging us to take a hard look at decisions in flood-prone areas. Salem's own climate vulnerability assessment and adaptation plan takes a really hard look at this. It's a terrific document. And there are multiple sensible options on the table. Things like revising zoning to discourage development in light of future flooding. Things like adapting building codes to require floodproofing in flood-prone areas. In light of things like this, if the city wants to double down on development in a flood-prone location, a place that could effectively be inundated, permanently inundated in the lifetime of the project, then it should be prepared to put millions of taxpayer dollars on the line in order to ensure that it can keep the North River at bay long term. And this project should be comprehensively flood-proof. The science is pretty ambiguous on this. If those 2 core assumptions are not part of your plan, I would urge you to take a very hard look at the science I'm talking about and to reconsider the pace and direction of the project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Could we keep that handout and can we copy it so everyone gets copies?
I would love to email a color version of it. I'm really sorry that there's
Sure,
one
if you
and it's
could
black and
provide
We'd
white.
be happy to have that as well.
Thank you.
Delighted. Thank you.
If you can send that to the city clerk, she will make sure that we all get copies of it. Thank you. Next person? Again, people who have not spoken in the previous, public hearing on this?
Good evening.
Record.
My name is David Hart. I live at 104 Federal Street. And for the record, I'm a member of the Historical Commission, Salem Historic Commission. But tonight, I am going to express my opinions as a private citizen. First of all, Mr. President, my wife wanted also to speak, but she apparently caught a stomach bug, and so she's not able to attend. So I do have her remarks, which I can read, and then my remarks. They will definitely be within the 5 minutes, but I have the permission to do that.
If you can do them both within the 5 minutes, wonderful. If not, just submit one.
Okay, thank you. Well, discretion being the better part of value, I would read hers first.
Good call. Wonderful call.
Barbara Cleary, 104 Federal Street. She is opposed to the declaration of these parcels of land as surplus. I am in agreement with many of the previous speakers who raised excellent points which deserve to be considered. My perspective is pretty simple. You're being asked to declare a substantial piece of property and a public way surplus, in which case you should be absolutely confident that the city does not now, nor in the future, will have any use for the land. Yet you have not provided with any comprehensive analysis of all the land owned by the city and possible uses the city might have for this and other properties 5, 10, and 20 years into the future. Not only does this lack of analysis not comply with the city's own legally required procedures, it would seem that it would be a common sense prerequisite for making a decision. In fact, this analysis would seem to be also a prerequisite for holding a public hearing on the matter. Many people are advancing arguments, pro and con, but there's no analysis to respond to. So everyone is really guessing at the city's arguments since they haven't been provided in any comprehensive way. Having said that, I would not be the least bit surprised if within hours or days of the close of this public hearing, you will be provided with a detailed written analysis from the administration as to why the property should be declared surplus. This may have lots of new arguments and new information, but by that time it will be too late for the public to respond. I can't guarantee this will happen, of course, but why do I think it is a good possibility? Well, it's because something similar happened after each of the first two public hearings. And I want to emphasize that none of these procedural issues are in any way the fault of the City Council. These are matters that you do not control. Just briefly to remind people, at the hearing on the rezoning, all anyone had to go on was the city's rationale for the zoning change. It was a few pages from a PowerPoint presentation. It was only after the public hearing was closed that the city planner and the city solicitor wrote memos detailing the planning and legal rationale for the recommended zoning change. Many of us thought that those arguments were far-fetched, but then it was apparently too late for our responses to be considered, as those of us who provided written comment to the planning board in response to those arguments were told the comments could not be entered into the public record because the public comment period was closed. Similarly, after the end of, but still continued meeting on surplus on February 4th, within less than 3 hours after the end of the meeting, the city posted a frequently asked questions narrative at multiple locations on the city's website. Whether you're pro or con, I don't think anyone who reads that document can assert that it's an objective narrative of the facts, but it does provide insight into the administrator's arguments in favor of the proposal, which again would have been helpful to have in advance. Consequently, I request that if after the close of this public hearing, the mayor or any city employees provide new information or analyses on this issue, that the public hearing be reopened so the public may respond. And specifically to the matter of this public hearing, I reiterate, through no fault of the City Council, I don't see that there is any way that you can have the information available to you to make an informed decision on declaring these parcels surplus, and I urge you to vote no on this matter. So that is Barbara Cleary's comments. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to read from the,
If I give you just one moment before, and I'll let you,
Yeah.
I'll let you read yours. So just I want to clarify for the, basically for the room as well as for the city council and everybody, on the matter of a declaration of surplus, a public hearing is not something that's required. It's something that we as the city council have elected to hold in order to take a chance to get input from everybody, but there is not a requirement to the process that we have to hold a public hearing on that one issue. All the other matters, the discontinuation, the zoning, and the sale itself, it is required. So this portion here is mainly because we do want to hear from people, but there's no tie-in to it. And in fact, the last time we had a declaration of surplus, approximately 2 years ago, I believe we did not do that, which was over in Riley Plaza. So just to be clear on that one.
I'm sure she'll be interested to
Go ahead.
consider
But
that.
mainly for the edification of everybody in the room.
Yes, thank you. Now, I'm going to then read some remarks that I have personally as a private citizen. In the 1996 master plan for the city of Salem, I would refer to page 27, and the paragraph is pretty short. Page 27, neighborhoods and housing. Salem residents live in identifiable, diverse, and strong neighborhoods. People experience planning decisions and priorities most directly and intimately in their neighborhoods, where decisions about housing, traffic, beautification projects, and municipal services affect their daily lives. Even Salem's strongest neighborhoods need vigilant policies to keep them stable. In addition, there are several neighborhoods that merit focused attention because they are subject to special conditions. So I am opposed to declaring the parcel surplus because, I'm just going to read a few points. The existing site is contaminated and has to be addressed. It could be extremely costly to remediate. And again, we do not have solid estimates. Site design has no buffer zone between building and site activities and adjacent residential properties. The scale of the new building has potential adverse effects on existing local historic district properties. The existing business could certainly take advantage of other highway accessible sites in Salem or to rehabilitate the building. The existing parking lot is a positive benefit for the city of Salem, for commuters as well as visitors and employees of nearby institutions. And changing the existing zoning from R2 to B4 would be a radical change, and the design of the large building is out of scale with the adjacent neighborhood. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next word. All right, name and address for the record.
Tim Jenkins, 343 Essex Street. I'd just like to discuss two things, if I could, PCBs and also the issue of parking. Briefly, I'm going to read some pieces on a document I'm happy to submit. What are the human effects of PCBs? So that we should at least have some idea of what we're talking about. Polychlorinated biphenyls are a group of 209 different chemicals which share a common structure but vary in a number of attached chlorine atoms. An estimated 1.3 million pounds, to be really horrible, of different types of PCBs were dumped in the Hudson River by General Electric from 1946 until 1977, when they were banned. The International Treaty on Persistent Organic Pollutants, drafted by 122 nations in Johannesburg in December 2000, targeted PCBs as one of the dirty dozen chemicals to be phased out worldwide. I'm just going to talk about the other key issue for me, and I think people in Salem, especially when you've heard what you have about cancer mortality rates just in the abutting neighborhood. Once PCBs enter a person's or animal's body, they tend to be absorbed into fat tissue and they remain there. Unlike water-soluble chemicals, they're not excreted, so the body accumulates PCBs over the years. This means that PCBs also accumulate via the food chain. A small fish may absorb PCBs in the water or by eating plankton. These PCBs are stored in its body. When a larger fish eats the small fish, it also eats and absorbs all the PCBs that have built up in the small fish. In this way, larger fish and animals can build up a highly concentrated store of PCBs. Some types of PCBs may be degraded into non-toxic form, where they are stored in the body, but this process may take years. In the same way, PCBs accumulate in women and are passed on to their infants through breast milk. This accumulation means that nursing infants may ingest PCB levels much higher than the levels in fish and other foods consumed by their mothers. PCBs have been found all over the world, including significant amounts in the Arctic and Antarctic, far from any dust sources. In fact, several studies have found very high levels of PCBs in the blood and breast milk of Inuit women. It is thought that PCBs spread through the air after evaporating from contaminated water and sediments, as well as through the water. And then I just want to read a few things about some of the diseases associated with PCBs and or dioxins, which are an even more relatively closely associated chemicals, but even more toxic. Studies of PCBs in humans have found increased rates of melanomas. You've heard about all of these tonight. Melanomas, liver cancer, gallbladder cancer, biliary tract cancer, gastrointestinal tract cancer, and brain cancer, and may be linked to breast cancer. PCBs are known to cause a variety of types of cancer in rats and mice and other animals. Why are PCBs called a probable carcinogen? I'm not going to go into it in much detail other than the fact that it's very, very difficult without subjecting people to PCBs to actually prove directly that they're the cause of the cancer. But all the science indicates that they are, and that's why they were banned. Let's see here. When women are exposed to PCBs before or during pregnancy, they can give birth to children with significant neurological and motor problems as well, including lowered IQ and poor short-term memory. A group of children in Michigan whose mothers had been exposed to PCBs were found to have decreased birth weight, head size, lowered performance on standardized memory, psychomotor, and behavioral tests, and lowered IQ. These effects lasted through at least 7 years. A group of women occupationally exposed to PCBs in upstate New York had shorter pregnancies and gave birth to children with lower birth weight. Another study of the children of women who ate contaminated Lake Ontario fish found significant performance impairments or standardized behavioral assessment tests. Exposure of one form of PCB to rats resulted in retarded growth, delayed puberty, decreased sperm counts, genital malformations, and in other studies, exposure to PCBs to rats in utero led to behavioral and psychomotor effects that lasted into adulthood. PCBs with only a few chlorine atoms can mimic the body's natural hormones, especially estrogen. Women who consumed PCB-contaminated fish from Lake Ontario were found to have shortened menstrual cycles. PCBs are also thought to play a role in reduced sperm counts, altered sex organs, premature puberty, changed sex ratios of children. More highly chlorinated PCBs with more chlorine atoms act like dioxins in altering the metabolism of sex steroids in the body, changing the normal levels of estrogen and testosterone. PCBs tend to change in the body and the environment from highly chlorinated to lower chlorinated forms, increasing their estrogen effects. I'll leave it pretty much at that, other than the fact that we've heard that this is occurring here in Salem. We have many contaminated sites, and they're contaminated with different agents, many different toxins. Many of them accumulate. PCBs are not the only one. We have lead. It accumulates in bone. That's also associated with cancer and other debilitating neurological diseases. I don't see any reason why we should take any more risk than absolutely necessary. We have a parking lot that functions and can probably generate enough income, as Dave Williams pointed out. And in that respect, I'd like to just pass on information about that I've put together. I call it a parking lot cost analysis. And I just wanted to hit a couple summaries. It's rather interesting. When the new parking garage was built, it ended up with 714 parking spaces. That's actually only an addition of 375 parking spaces, even though the city was at one point looking for a facility that would be 1,000 parking spaces. I just want to give you some interesting figures on this. If you calculate what the cost of those parking spaces were through the parking facility, the additional 375, The cost per parking space was $117,333. That makes no assumption that some of that $44 million was used to build a platform and maybe a bike facility, an area where you can stand and wait for the train. Nevertheless, if you're building it for the purpose of building parking spaces, that's what they cost, $117,333. This site, if we can purchase it for $500,000, which I believe is the figure, it may be less if we can negotiate a better deal with Mass Development, would turn out that we are actually purchasing these parking spaces for $4,132. We have an estimate of costs just to build these parking spaces at $3,500 on the site. So it's quite remarkable. To give you another example, we have, and I'll briefly go into this, as part of the appraisal process for this site, they used a site in Topsfield by the train station. That site sold for $845,000, and they built 74 parking spaces on it. Those 74 parking spaces ended up costing effectively Topsfield $17,740. I think that's the correct figure, excuse me, but it's right in that level. That's 4 times more than we're looking at paying for these sites. So if you just look at it, what is Salem's cost of acquiring these 121 parking spaces? It's actually very cost effective. Here's the next thing. We do have, Dave pointed out, we have very, very low utilization rates
Mr.
here.
Jenkins, please bring this.
We have low utilization rates, and frankly, if we just doubled or tripled those, we will generate enough income out of this parking lot to be the equivalent of what would be generated, what the assumed tax revenues will be from this building, and it'll be generated right up front. We're not going to be waiting 10 years to actually get the same amount of money. So, at any rate, it seems to make a lot more sense to hold on to a parking lot and not expose the public to greater risk. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jenkins.
Mr. President, could I just ask a quick question?
Sure, I'll allow it.
When you said acquiring the lot, were you talking about the Universal Steel lot?
Yeah, essentially, we have I believe we have what you can call either a grant or a loan. That loan,
It only needs to be paid back if we end up selling it, though.
not necessarily, not if you read the document. I'm certainly happy to look at the city solicitor. There is,
Just wanted clarification on the
well,
others.
and by the way, after 5 years, though, that loan starts to accrue interest, and there is a debate as to whether or not we have the first lien or not, but that is something can be negotiated with
Mr.
Mass
Jenkins,
Development.
that debate's
Thanks,
not.
I'm just
fair.
answering
Thank
the question.
Appreciate it.
Any, next person? Yeah, name and address for the record, please.
Fred Biebesheimer, 17.5 River Street. Some of these things have already been touched on by Dave and previous people, so I'll skim through the first part of mine a little bit faster in the interest of time. So I'm opposed to declaring the Universal Steel lot as surplus properly because in my opinion, it's not surplus, it's a valuable asset to the city, both now and even more importantly for the future. Just because the city opted to stop charging for parking last year doesn't seem to me a good case to be made that it doesn't have potential for parking moving forward. The lots, as I passed out here, the lot is routinely well over 50% full and is at capacity during snow emergencies and during the Halloween timeframe. So, I've got a couple of things that have already been brought up. One observation is the MBTA is going to be is proposing fare hikes shortly of up to 10%, and that's going to cause more and more Salem commuters to look to economize in any way they can. And if we have a lot that's a little bit cheaper than the MBTA lot, it's going to get used more in the future, not less. New hotels being proposed on the Essex Walking Mall with no parking. That's going to put a burden on existing parking in the area. Probate court's already been mentioned. Moving back to Federal Street, we know that they're currently using over 130 spots in their Shetland Office Park location. Those are going to have to get absorbed somewhere in the area. The former Superior Court and County Commissioner's Office, also discussed earlier, are prime for redevelopment. They'll need parking. Even one-time unpredictable things like the upcoming repair of the Salem-Beverly Bridge is going to put resource loads on our parking as people don't want to take buses from Beverly to Salem. They're going to look to park in Salem against it. It's more one-time things. And we know that the MBTA garage was built smaller than was projected its needs. So this lot provides a perfect opportunity to supplement some of those needs. The second half of my comments really are on another issue that I don't think has really been discussed much is the reuse of, when Webb does build the new facility, the reuse of the existing Webb building. There's been some, it's a classic mill-style building, primed for redevelopment, consistent with the NRCC, probably housing. It can accommodate a lot of units. It's a big building. But if we sell the lot next to it and it becomes a facility, it'll dramatically impact the ability to redevelop that property. So some examples, the 28 Goodhue Street development has about 45 units and needed, I think I counted from Google Maps, about 96 parking spaces. There's another development, I think, on 331 Lafayette Street that's in the proposal stages that had to get scaled back in size to provide 85 spots, and that's a smaller square footage development than the existing Webb building would be. The existing Webb building lot can support at most 30 cars. So, and I think the NRCC requires, I think, 2 parking spaces per unit, and if you could fit 50 units in this building easily, you're going to need 100 spots. They've got room for 30, and they're going to need more parking to make this a viable development opportunity. The property taxes from fully developed existing building could approach twice the value of the proposed tax revenue for the warehouse building being proposed. So those are kind of my comments. So I think I'm opposed to the notion of declaring this as surplus, because I don't think it's surplus because we're going to sell it and get reduced taxes for 10 years because of because of unnecessary and unknown environmental costs and risks. We're going to declare this. We're contemplating declaring this lot surplus, even though there's a clear present and even more important future need for parking in the area for all the reasons I've mentioned and have been mentioned previously. We're contemplating declaring this surplus, even though in the same time we're going to call this surplus and say we don't need the parking. We're proposing carving up green space on other parts of Bridge Street to add parking. So that seems a little bit of a disconnect there. And then my final point there is we're contemplating declaring the surplus, which will effectively limit any possible productive adaptive reuse of the existing Webb building and the resulting revenues that could generate for the city. So I'm hopeful that when you look at the big picture, you'll see that the former Universal Steel site is a valuable asset to the city and should not be declared surplus.
Thank you very much. Name and address for the record.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
I'm Lori Tremblay. I'm a Salem resident and a business owner in downtown Salem. And I appreciate the comments on the safety and the PCP amount that's in the ground. I would really am concerned about the environmental aspects, as well as the impact on the neighborhoods and the zoning laws that would be changed would impact the neighborhoods and the town. Also, the tourists that are traveling around the train station that would be needing some walking space. I think that's important to consider not changing the zoning laws, and maybe Webb, which is a great Salem business, could be looking somewhere where the zoning laws are already in place for the type of business that they are. So I guess the main points that I would have are keeping the zoning laws so that we could have businesses that are more friendly towards the neighborhood, retail shops, or the existing laws that were originally designed to help the neighborhood and the downtown area, to keep that in place, and also in the environmental issue. So those are my 2 points. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next. All right, we had one from over the side here.
My name is Chuck Von Bruns. I'm another River Streeter, 3 River Street. I'm a retired CPA, and let me give you a handout here. The first page in the handout is really this chart here. And the packet contains all the backup for the numbers that are on that chart. And in this presentation, I'm going to go through those numbers because I don't feel that the whole impact of the financial aspects of this proposal have seen the light of day. So that is my attempt today, to try to present what is really going on with the dollars and cents in this plan. So what I've done by the way, in the packets, everything is color-coded so you can follow in the backup where the numbers come from. So it's totally transparent and you can analyze those numbers to see if they make sense to you. I'm going to go through those as well. Now, I came up with 3 basic scenarios. And those scenarios are the status quo, web proposal, and web moves within Salem, another site within Salem. The categories that I've got here are property tax issues, evaluation because of the website, and other. Other includes parking lot revenues and universal steel proceeds. And what I've done here is put it all on a 10-year basis, so it gets rid of all the little fluctuations that happen in year 1, year 2. So you can look at it as a full business analysis. Now, in the status quo, the elements of the status quo are really a couple of things. The current brick building, the taxes that we generate from that brick building. Alpha Auto, which is a site next to the parking lot, is a source of revenue, and also revenue from the parking lot. The web proposal has a couple of factors in it, but it basically represents web putting a distribution center on the Universal Steel site, and it represents the 5-story brick building being converted into the highest use possible, which is maybe residential condos or a combination of office and residential condos of some sort. The third possibility is that web moves to another site. Here you construct a building similar to the proposal, like they want to put on the parking lot, put it somewhere else in Salem. It would mean converting the existing building the same into a loft situation or office condos. Alpha Auto stays the same, and Salem gets an official parking lot. So those are basically the 3 scenarios. Now, here's how I set it up. I started by using a 10-year period to get rid of those fluctuations. I estimated the 10-year Salem tax revenues for each of the different properties involved. I looked at the loss of property value to abutters. I looked at the probable revenues from a parking lot. And I looked at the universal sale proceeds. And as I said, all the backup is in there, color-coded. So, what does the chart say? Well, if you look at the chart, it's pretty obvious what it says. It says that if web moved within Salem, it's by far the best financial situation for Salem, by far. And in fact, it's over 2 times better in terms of 10-year revenue. 2 times. Actually, it's 216%. It also says the status quo, our little status quo that we have, if we just utilized it, is almost equivalent to the web proposal. So, in a nutshell, that's the situation. But let's go over the numbers so that you can see that I've used some fair numbers, that you can make sense of them and that they make sense to you. And I'm not pie in the skying things. First, there's the calculation for the property tax revenues on the left. And again, I'm using 10-year property tax calculations. The brick building, which is the 5-story building, I have at $1.1,700,000. This is the current web building converted into a loft arrangement. For this estimate, I used 5 floors of 2-bedroom units with 6 to a floor, and each unit valued at $300,000. When you do this, you get a valuation for the building of $9 million, and an annual tax revenue of $141,000. The 10-year total isn't 141 times 10 because the first couple years they've got to move out, build another site, and then that second year they've got to renovate. So 2 years there are at the normal tax rate that they're paying currently. Over here, on the brick building, the current status quo is $207,000. That's for 10 years. Yes, Webb is paying only $20,700 currently for their real estate taxes, which I find ridiculously small. And in fact, since from year 2000, it was 14. It's only gone up to 20,000 over that time. That's about 2.5 residents real estate tax in my neighborhood, with a valuation of about $450,000. Alpha Auto is here for $112,000. That represents, they pay $11,000 a year for that little site there, that little rinky-dink site. The new Webb building over here, we have at $930,000, and I'm using the mayor's number of $100,000 a year tax revenue estimate, with construction for the first year of $220,700. By the way, I've used the same revenue calculation over here if you build it in another site within Salem, because they're basically equivalent buildings. So you can translate that from one site to another. Now, the next category here, we've kind of finished with the property tax issues, is devaluation. Devaluation is a negative number.
If you can summarize this, please.
I'm going to finish this, and it won't take long. I'm getting near the end. The negative $1.1 million is the representative devaluation of the properties that are for direct abutters. And I mean direct abutters, not people across the street, but direct abutters. And by the way, I'm not a direct abutter. So where does the number come from? Well, we've had an assessor from a local town who's a registered real estate appraiser visit the site and the abutting neighborhood and give us his estimate of potential property devaluation due to the Webb proposal. Before he visited, I had been using about a 10% devaluation for only the abutters, and was surprised when he said it's around 15% or more, in his opinion. To get the number here, I took the assessed value of the abutters times 15% to arrive at the total loss of $1.1 million. That represents a loss to those abutters of about $71,000 apiece. To put that in perspective, it means a $400,000 house, which I think a lot of people in this room have that kind of house, or better, maybe a few worse. But to use that as a good example, that represents a loss of $60,000 to that person. That's a significant amount of money that the owner could be counting on for retirement or the children's education. And in fact, you're reducing a person's net worth by $60,000, just like that, by making this proposal happen. Just think of how you'd feel if Webb took $60,000 out of your pocket, and here's the kicker. You're forced to face their cement block walls and see and hear the tractor-trailer trucks every single day. They take the money from you, plus you have that insult every single day looking in your face. You should also note that the proposed Webb distribution center will be paying about $20,000 less real estate tax than the abutters currently do. Going back a step, the negative $177,000 here that if you look on there, that is there because that represents the lost revenue to the city because of the devaluation in assessed value. Now, the parking lot revenues down here, $785. We know already that about $18,000 a year is collected at Halloween by the boosters. So that number is part of that calculation. I've used $4 a day for weekday-only parking and did not include 11 weekday holidays. I assumed, in my opinion, a very conservative estimate of 60 spaces a day on average over 10 years. Why did I use the number? The number of people currently using it have taken counts in 2015 and 16 and have come up with 25 to a full lot. With a good amount lately at between 40 and 70. We've had people looking and counting. Again, people have stated the courthouse is going to provide in September about 140 spaces. Developers are anxiously trying to build condos all around the area, as we know, and they will be in need of additional parking when they go to the train. If the loft condo spaces are built, as Fred said, there's not enough spaces there to fill the need to build that building to its highest value. They're going to have to get an extra 20, 30 spaces. They're going to have to go next door to get them. And it's a perfect spot for guaranteed parking. And I also noted that on average, I use 60 spaces. It could be lower in the first years, higher in the later, but the average is 60. I think it's a very reasonable number. In fact, it's too reasonable. I'll skip that. Please note that the annual tax revenues from the proposed web distribution center would be $100,000, not much more than the $80,000 I used in the traffic parking lot estimate. With an average of 80 spaces a day at $4, it would be about the same. Now, the last piece I want to mention here is the Universal Steel proceeds. We all know that's $1 million. The remediation cost is the amount reimbursed via web via the TIF, or in other words, tax credit. The amount I used here is the negative $400,000 that the mayor has given us as her limit, and we don't really know the final number yet, but that's what I used here. Now, to summarize, looking at the final chart in total, it clearly shows that Webb moving to another site in Salem, and you can't argue with that. It's a big difference. It's not a teeny difference. It's more than twice as much an impact to the city. The city is going to do that much better if they do not allow them to build in that parking lot and have them move to another spot. If they have to, incentivize them to move. It's a stunning difference. The next question is, would Webb do it? Well, if you take them at their word, I think they would. Jeff Pope, who's the president and was here last time, he's the president, in a letter to the Salem News, has stated that Webb needs a more up-to-date facility and that they intend to stay in Salem because they value their relationship with the Salem community. He also stated that they would renovate the brick building. If you put those pieces together, one can conclude that if they don't get the Universal Steel site, they would certainly want to build somewhere in Salem to stay in the community. In my mind, if they did this, they would truly earn the accolades thrown their way by everybody that they're a good neighbor and a good corporate citizen. If they were that kind of person, that kind of company, they would do what's best for Salem and what's best for them. So, let's face it, the best financial solution for the city, and I mean financial, I'm not talking about all the other pollution issues and everything else that people have been talking about. Financial issues. This is the best proposal for the city. It brings in the most tax revenue to Salem by far. It allows the conversion of the brick building that they're currently in to the highest value, and everybody keeps talking about doing things to the highest value. It lets Webb maximize the value of their brick building so they can make a good profit. It means it meets the stated business goals of FW Web Management. It gives Salem a valuable parking lot. It keeps jobs in Salem. It leaves the historic neighborhood intact. And maybe the most important, it leaves the contamination safely sealed under the parking lot asphalt. The bottom line, and I'm used to that, it's a win-win-win for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. Dan?
I've got one question for
Yes.
Mr. Von Bruns. And I appreciate the placard being up here. You list 3 different scenarios.
Yes.
One with Webb moving within Salem, the Webb proposal, and the status quo.
Yes.
Am I correct in saying there's actually a 4th scenario?
Pardon me?
Isn't there actually a 4th scenario?
There can be a 4th scenario, which I have included in the back page.
Which the 4th scenario is Webb moving from Salem.
Correct.
What are the figures for Webb moving from Salem?
Glad you asked. I did.
Counselor, let's,
Excellent question.
let's not stretch this out, if we could. There would be an impact, obviously.
The answer, the 10-year period, we would get instead of this, Carol, it would come in here at $2,067,000. Okay?
So you're saying it would be benefit.
It would come out better than the Webb proposal.
So in your estimation, it would be better for Salem if Webb moved out of town as opposed to the status quo or the Webb proposal.
It would financially. I'm not saying that's what I
Thank
want
you.
them to do.
Thank
I
you
prefer
for
them
the
to be in Salem.
Chuck?
And I didn't talk about that.
Enough. No more
I
of
was
these,
asked a
please.
question, sir.
Yes,
And I'm
we're-
answering the question.
Counselor, we're not going to do any more of, this is supposed to be for public comment. Please, let's keep it to that.
Lou Sirianni, Lots Court, Salem. You all know me as President Terrell, counselors, Mayor Driscoll, you all know me as a neighbor and a friend. But tonight, I'd like you to consider me as an out-of-town expert. My office is in downtown Boston, so I think that qualifies. I've been a practicing architect for 35 years. But more importantly, my business partner and I have been hired by cities across the country to advise them on issues similar to this one. And I'll give you just briefly 3 examples. In Austin, Texas, our client was the state of Texas. They had 2 sites near the Capitol for a new building, and they wanted us to analyze and recommend one of the sites. In Cleveland, I led a 2-day charrette with the city planning department to set guidelines for the design of 2 buildings on the lake front adjacent to downtown Cleveland. And in Boston, the Boston Redevelopment Authority asked the Boston Society of Architects to assist them with negotiations with a developer for a parcel behind City Hall. The BSA asked me and 2 other architects to represent them. So I'm pleased to be here in Salem tonight to speak in favor of maintaining the public parking as is. No one ever complains about having too much parking. The state and the MBTA project the need for parking 1,000 cars to serve Salem Depot. That's just a fact. People represent and park in this current lot, and they work in the station or at the courts. Why do they park there? It's cheaper. They expect to pay $1 less than the garage if the city were charging. They'd still park there. It's easier to drive in and out, avoid traffic is what I hear. People from the courthouse park there. One woman told me that it is quicker to get home. One man likes the pleasant walk on good days down Federal Street. A court officer just last week told me that the lot will be full when the probate court opens. Today there were 80 cars there. The city should charge now for parking there, and when the next court is open, there will be even more people parking there. It'll fill up. The MBTA garage will fill to capacity, 700 and some cars right now. That's going to fill to capacity. It might take 3 years. It might take 6 years. It will fill up. The city's extra lot there, 66 cars, and this lot, 112, will not come up to the number of cars that will be needed around the station. Now, let's think about the old jail. The council decided to make a parking lot on the new parkland regardless of whether a restaurant goes back in or not. I heard that the neighbors are delighted with the new parking spaces. Then think ahead. The existing red brick building, Webb's building, everyone would agree that it should be lofts or some other commercial development. Webb has indicated that they plan to redevelop the building. However, there will not be enough space to accommodate their parking and service needs, let alone a nice outdoor area. I'm advising the council and Mayor Driscoll that the right approach for the future is to keep the city parking lot to facilitate existing building redevelopment. The city could lease spaces to loft residences or what have you. Again, think about the old jail. However, in this case, parking is already right there. We know there's going to be pressure on the jail relative to parking. You already have acknowledged that. Finally, I would like to work with the city to encourage Webb to move to Highland Avenue or Swampscott Road or some other location in Salem. You can't tell me that there isn't another spot in Salem for Webb. I believe there is. Our planning department will tell you that this has been done and there are problems. I know from my experience in other cities across America that problems can be fixed. And if you decide to keep this parking lot, I offer the city the resources of my firm to find a fix that will help a good business like Webb stay in Salem and find a place that is appropriate for them. not in the backyards of our oldest historic street. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Siriani. Next person, again, name and address for the record.
My name is Elizabeth Nugent, 12 River Street. I'm speaking today as in opposition, as a direct abutter, for declaring the land of the former Universal Steel surplus property. This is not surplus property. Councilors, I ask you to please listen to the concerns of neighbors when we ask you to keep this site as a usable, revenue-generating parking lot. This parking lot next to our property does not lower our property values. This parking lot does not block views of Leslie's Retreat Park and sky from the River and Federal Street neighborhood. This parking lot does not add health risks to families, and this parking lot does not disturb the quality of life. Declaring this property surplus will allow for an oversized building that does not belong a stone's throw away from family-oriented, walkable, historic neighborhood. You have a choice to listen to the citizens' overwhelming opposition or to continue on the city's path allowing for Webb's expansion. And as the opposition speakers before me have said so well, better than I can, this would be a much riskier endeavor. Thank you for allowing us to speak tonight.
Thank you. Again, name and address for the record. Thank you.
Polly Wilbert, 7 Cedar Street. I'm the president of the South Salem Neighborhood Association, but I appear here tonight as a private citizen. I want to say that I am here in opposition to this surplus decision, and I want to also agree that I believe that the courts deserve sufficient parking for their purposes, since we have asked them to remain in downtown Salem and have disrupted them while we have asked them to go off-site while there have been renovations to the court buildings, and will be bringing them back. Additionally, since the courts did not contribute the money for the 250 parking spaces in the MBTA garage that we had initially contemplated, I believe that we're at least 250 spaces short downtown for the court's purposes. Since somebody brought up rising sea level, I would like to bring up a whale. And as Rumsfeld said, there are known unknowns. F.W. Webb's a very successful maintenance, repair, and organization company. But like many other industries in the United States, it is one that is being rapidly consolidated. The whale in the neighborhood is Ferguson. It's a $13 billion in sales company. You know the shop is in Lynn, and in fiscal year 15, they had $13 billion in sales. They're the nation's largest distributor of residential, commercial, public plumbing supplies, pipe, valves, and fittings, HVAC, waterworks, and industrial components for businesses in that arena. They're a division of Woolsey plc of London. In 2015, they acquired 13 additional companies in bolt-on acquisitions in the plumbing supply business, including Redlawn and Johnson Supply Company, which is based in Portland, Maine, which has 10 locations in New Hampshire and Maine. There is nothing in my mind that says that F.W. Webb isn't a target for a whale, couldn't be part of a consolidation of the industry in which the whale would decide to eliminate competition in the neighborhood. It's a known unknown, and I would say to you, it is not without consideration. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Josiah Fisk, resident since 358 Essex Street. My business address is 8 Front Street. I think I want to address the idea of information, really, and I think looking at this situation of surplus, I would feel that I don't have enough information to make an informed decision because there is no comparison to make. For example, we've been talking about parking, and I think that there are some compelling numbers on this, but in deciding whether this property is surplus, I think it is only fair that the option of parking be given, let's say, a good run for its money. One of my expertise areas is in marketing. It's not what I do, but it's something that I have done professionally at various times in the past. And if you want to know what something is going to yield you, like a parking lot, you have to figure out what it's going to yield you if you market it. It's not going to yield you very much if there's a little sign there and it's not on Google and there's no blue signs with the P on it and there's essentially no marketing whatsoever. I don't know how you can evaluate what this parking lot would be as a parking lot unless you have seriously considered and done serious homework to understand what it would yield if it were promoted and properly made visible and there were, in essence, a business plan for it. So in a sense, I don't know how you can say, how you know whether it's surplus or not. I don't think the information exists yet. And I think we haven't seen any information from the city that I'm aware of that shows that such a plan, a good faith effort to investigate what this is worth, if it's properly pushed and gotten behind and promoted. I don't think we've seen that there has been an effort made to do that, and I think that there needs to be an effort made to do that if you're going to make an informed decision. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Justin Whittier, 10 River Street. I'm here to speak in opposition to surplus, but I just want to preface my remarks by mentioning that, Mr. President, you rightly clarified that the public hearing is not required for the question of surplus. But I would suggest that once having opened it to public comment, it would be improper to allow one side more opportunity to advocate for its position than the other side. So I hope David Hart's comments will be taken to heart. Oh, Barbara Cleary, my apologies. You've heard a lot tonight about revenue to the city, which would be generated by Webb's proposal. I'd just like to take a moment to put that in a larger perspective. From the mayor's proposed 2015 budget, quote, "A large number of major developments are primed for forward progress, all of which will add to our tax base and generate additional revenues beyond property taxes. Indeed, in the coming years, there will be close to $1.8 billion in public and private projects and investments made in our city." Now, this $1.8 billion figure is rough. In fact, it appears on the mayor's Building Salem website as both over $1.5 billion and over $1.7 billion, depending on which page you look at. A couple of $100 million difference. So let's use the middle figure of $1.7 billion. What does Webb's proposal represent as a portion of this? The mayor's website lists the dollar amount as $2 million. That is 0.1% of the total. Or put another way, you would need 1,000 Webbs to equal that total. To my mind, $1 out of 1,000 is a trivial amount, certainly not something that should justify any risk to public health. Add that consideration to what you've heard from Chuck von Bruns as to the fiscal benefit to the city. Even if you regard this trivial amount as valuable, every dollar counts, he has shown that alternatives are in fact a greater benefit. But even where they represent a more or less equal figure, maintaining the lot has the added benefit of being no risk to public health. I found it interesting that the representative from EPA equivocated on the risks of development versus non-development. It seemed to me a politic answer. A politic answer is not what we need. I also want to speak to a point raised by Lynn Duncan in her memorandum of July 29, in which she addresses the NRCC master plan. Let me just read to you the first sentence of the master plan. The North River Canal Corridor Master Plan provides a framework for new growth and development in the North River area while preserving and enhancing the quality of life in the adjacent residential neighborhoods. Preserving and enhancing. In fact, the master plan calls again and again for preserving the historic neighborhood character and for streetscape improvements that are historically sensitive. Just like Marco Rubio. So what does Lynn Duncan say of Webb's proposal in her memorandum? She says, quote, "The Webb proposal is not consistent." She reconciles this by saying the parking lot is not consistent either, but leaving the parking lot does not foreclose the possibility of a future consistent use. Webb's proposal does. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Pardon?
May I speak?
Did you speak of the last one?
Yes, and this is what I wanted to ask you, Mr. President. Last time I was here, I spoke as a private citizen. Now, Historic Salem Incorporated has asked me to read a letter into the record as their president.
Okay, we will allow that then.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I originally emailed this into the members of the Salem City Council and the Planning Board. Historic Salem Incorporated, whose mission includes ensuring that a new development complements the historic character of the city, believes strongly that the current proposal from FW Webb for a combined warehouse, distribution center, and showroom on the Universal Steel site has a clear negative impact on the important historic resources and should not go forward in its current state. The former Universal Steel property is adjacent to the North River Canal Corridor Neighborhood Mixed-Use District, as well as to the McIntyre District, which is listed on the National and State Registers of Historic Places. Among the many historic buildings adjacent to the site is the Pierce Nicholas House, a National Historic Landmark owned by the Peabody Essex Museum. The Guide to Salem speaks eloquently to the importance of the McIntyre District, and I quote, "This densely settled residential area of the city contains one of the greatest concentrations of notable pre-1900 domestic structures existent in the United States. Collectively, they stand as a monument to the mercantile and maritime ascendancy of Salem in the later 18th and early 19th centuries and constitute one of the most beautiful streetscapes in America. The proposed building directly borders and is visually prominent from public streets and sidewalks on Federal, Beckford, River, Andover, and Lynn Streets, and impacts at least 50 historic residences. The building is extraordinarily out of scale with the historic architecture and is monolithic in design and appearance. It will be an overwhelming visual intrusion on one of the most important historic districts in the country. The McIntyre District was also recognized as a local historic district in 1981, a designation that is regulated by the Salem Historical Commission. This is the highest level of regulation of historic features. Individual owners and residents have invested significant resources to revitalize this part of the McIntyre District, which had experienced severe neglect over the middle part of the 20th century. The negative impact of both the visual intrusion and the activities associated with this particular commercial use, including the location of loading docks and constant truck deliveries directly adjacent to these residents, will certainly slow, if not derail, private investment in the historic inventory. The 2015 Preservation Plan update recommends that the city, and I quote, "establish a system to determine if any public or private project receiving city funds, permits, or any ordinance or policy will have potential negative impact on an inventoried or state registered property or archaeological resource. For any project that may impact an inventoried or listed property or relates to a broader preservation issue, the Salem Historical Commission should be notified and a non-binding comment requested," unquote. It's very concerning that the city of Salem itself is supporting a project with a significant detrimental effect on the McIntyre District. We recommend that comment be sought from the Salem Historical Commission on this project as suggested by the Preservation Plan. Further, any consideration of a B4 zoning district directly adjacent to a fragile historic neighborhood is not consistent with planning principles and especially not with the R2 zoning of the McIntyre District. Moreover, the North River Canal Corridor Master Plan and Zoning was created to guide development of former industrial and commercial properties along the North River. In fact, the project would not be permitted under the Master Plan and Zoning. Bridge Street is also a major entrance corridor into our historic downtown, but it does not currently create a compelling experience as residents and visitors approach downtown. The design of any development along this route should improve the perception of the overall value of our downtown. The design of the proposed building is inappropriate. Even a utilitarian building such as a storage facility can contribute to streetscape in an interesting way. Unfortunately, this building does not. The current FW Webb building on Bridge Street is a well-preserved illustration of Salem's former industrial economy. A commitment of reuse of this building is critical before the city disposes of the property directly adjacent. We note that this building is not protected under any local ordinances. Finally, the discontinuance of the centuries-old Beckford Street public way removes an important and valuable historic amenity to the neighborhood. The public way provides important access to Leslie's Retreat Park and the MBTA station. We understand and appreciate the value of the FW Webb Company to the economy of Salem and appreciate that they wish to make an investment in the city. We encourage the city to work with Webb to find another appropriate location for this facility that does not have this detrimental effect on historic properties. Sincerely, Jennifer Firth is president, who I'm sorry I did not know it was me. We're located at 9 North Street. And I also just wanted to quickly note, I hadn't heard before, that 500 piles will be driven into the soil in that area. I can't imagine the damage, the potential damage to all those historic homes. I don't understand whether that's going to be monitored, if the residents will be paid for any kind of cracked walls or foundations, but I consider that a potential historic catastrophe to this area. Thank you.
Thank you. Person? Any other persons who've not spoken on the issue? Yes.
Good evening, how you doing? My name's Carrie Rourke, I live at 6 Andover Street. So I'm not a scientist, I'm not an architect, and I'm not a CPA. I'm an English teacher, so I deal in stories, so this will be a little different. And I'd like to just tell you 2 quick stories if I can. The first is actually the story of me. I am the 4th generation, and my children are the 5th generation to live in my home. My family has owned this home for over 100 years. We've lived in this neighborhood, and we've committed to this neighborhood. My husband and I are professors. We make a good income. We could have lived anywhere we wanted to live, probably, and we chose to live in Salem. When I first heard about this proposal from Webb, my first instinct was actually about the aesthetics of it, and I didn't really know enough about it. So I came to the meetings. I came here to the meetings, and I was actually shocked. And what I really just want to tell you about is how my thinking has changed. Like I said, my concern was really about the aesthetics, and I came and I heard my neighbor Melissa talking about how she had received notice in 2012 that her son Ben should not play outside. And I sat there just agape because I thought, I'm a person who generally trusts. I trust processes, I trust government, I trust corporations. That's just who I am. And I sat there and I thought, Melissa, where she lives, okay, her house abuts Bridge Street. Mine on Andover doesn't abut Bridge Street, but I think I actually live closer to Universal Steel than she does, and I didn't get that letter. So I was raising children and letting them play outside, and I just almost died when I came to that meeting and I heard her say that. So for me, I guess I'm here in opposition to declaring this as a surplus, primarily because of the safety issues, and really I just wanted to say that it really came out of that moment. After I heard Melissa say that and I started listening to all many of my neighbors and friends speak about the safety issues, I was reflecting back upon my grandmother. And my grandmother worked for the city of Salem for many years. She, first of all, was a teacher at Salem High School, and she was the assistant recreation director in the city of Salem for her entire adult career, retiring in 1972. And she loved this city. And she was one of 8 children raised in that home. 6 of them died of cancer. Is it a coincidence? After listening to Meg tonight, I don't know. And after being here at the last meeting, I don't know. One of them, Albert, died at age 10 of leukemia. He died in the home. My grandmother, when she later was lucky enough to die of pancreatic cancer, and had notice of that and was able to die in her own home, chose to die in the same room that her brother had died in when she was 12 and he was 10. Her sister Catherine died at age 28 of breast cancer. She was well on her way to becoming a professional pianist, a concert pianist. And her sister Gertrude died in her early 50s of lung cancer. She was not a smoker. 2 others died of cancer, and I'm not sure of the exact etiology of that cancer. The other 2 escaped it. One of them died of emphysema, surely self-induced. I'll just know as I spent my childhood in a cloud of smoke. So I just want to say, for me, I think, like you, I'm a thinking person. I really appreciate this city. I've come to this. I'm not anyone's puppet. I can tell you that for sure. I definitely think for myself. And I have been sitting here and reflecting and thinking, and I just ask you as a taxpayer and a parent, and most importantly, as somebody who really wants to stay in Salem, to please not consider this surplus and keep it as a parking lot. It's great. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else who did not speak at the previous public hearing? Didn't you?
Not the previous one.
Just the first one? All right, let's see. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Darrell Abavisi, 122 Federal Street. And I'm here in opposition to the proposal to declare the Universal Steel site as surplus. You've heard a lot of reasons for that this evening. The high points are a chronic and increasing need for additional parking in that area, serious concerns for health hazards associated with development of the site, lack of significant financial benefit to the city as compared with the development and surplus proposal, and finally, all of the adverse consequences associated with the change of zoning use and development of that site. You've heard the viewpoints that the Webb proposal is inappropriate. Any other uses of that site that would result from its availability under B4 zoning would probably be worse. So, for all these reasons and the arguments behind them, this is an inappropriate and ill-advised proposal. You should not declare it surplus. I urge you not to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. And any other persons who have not spoken at the previous meeting? Name and address for the record.
Good evening. My name is Linda Ronchetti. I live at 190 Bridge Street. I oppose the declaration of the Universal parking lot as a surplus. With all the new projects being developed around town, we need this lot. Why did the city vote to reduce the green space near the old Salem jail to make more parking if the city did not need more parking? And we do not need to have more dust raised, as was mentioned. Some dust may be raised. We don't know how much. But whatever amount it is, it's just going to add to the previous dust that was already put on people's lawns, on their trees, and with the children playing in the yards. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further? Thank you. Again, name and address for the record.
Peter Nugent, 12 River Street. I'm at a butter. I oppose the declaration of the property surplus. I think we've heard a lot today about the financial and health aspects. It's interesting to know that, I don't know if Carrie, if that letter came from the city. I live next to the property while they were cleaning it up the first time. I never got a letter from the city, but the people that were the contractors that were doing the work there actually made flyers and brought them around on various days when they were doing work and it was windy to try to tell people. But here, I had kids that were out there but never told by the city. So I'm a little worried about the safety concerns. Again, as you know, the area floods. You got people going to the train station all the time. You got the community. You got Leslie Park. You got a dog park over there, too. I'd be interested to know the people that pay. I'm a dog owner myself. That people that are going to pay for a permit to have their dogs there and know that they're across from a toxic site, and plus the water that their dogs, or the land the dogs are on, is being washed over by the flooding all the time. Just last month, I don't know if I came in late, I apologize. I had pictures. There was probably 4 inches of standing water across Bridge Street, more than 4 inches, sorry, on Bridge Street, but on the Leslie Street going into the North River. So a little more about safety and environmental issues. North River, as you know, I mean, you might not know. I don't know if you know there's only 3 rivers in Salem. Not really. There's only one river, Forest River. The other ones are basically conduits. But in any case, North River starting to come back. As you know, Salem Sound has been working on it, and also the EPA to see about fish return. I participated in a fish count there. All whites are starting to come back there. Again, toxic water going across the park into that river. It'd be nice to have a river in Salem that is not part of a conduit. So again, I'm opposed to declaring the property surplus. I'm very opposed to uncapping it and going through what people have already gone through in the neighborhood, in addition to creating other safety and hazardous conditions for the community and people in the train and the Bridge Street area. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else who'd like to comment who has not already? Thank you. You guys can work it out. Go ahead. Name and address for the record.
Yeah, my name's Stephen Whittier, and I live at 10 River Street. And I'm here today in opposition to the Webb proposal. My family directly abuts this site, and are very concerned about the situation at hand. We were fortunate enough to have the privilege to build one of the few new homes in the McIntyre Historic District prior to purchasing the lot that we have and live at now. We met frequently with our neighbors to get to know each other and to work out a way to enhance the neighborhood. We met with people like John and Carol Carr, Ann Knight, and the Burns family, who lived right next door to us at the time. And they had all worked to restore their own properties, and it encouraged us to do so as well. We met several times with the Historic Commission at that time to create a design that would be compatible with the homes from the 1700s, which are the primary homes in the River Street neighborhood. And at the same time, plenty of other young families, as we were at the time, moved in, built and rebuilt homes that were in need of work, and it's become a thriving neighborhood. As now we have a new generation of families who have moved in here with young children, hoping for a peaceful, friendly environment in which to raise them. Instead, I believe they're faced with the possibility of exposure to contaminants, as well as the potential for damage to old foundations due to the pile driving that will come about, and the heavy tractor-trailer truck traffic. As a carpenter and builder, I've seen damage like this occur to buildings more than once. And I just believe that allowing this proposed box store is not only incompatible with its present surroundings, it would be an obstacle to the future completion of the Bridge Street corridor as it was planned. Thank you.
Thank you. Nobody's cutting you off this time.
I'm Vicky Siriani. I live on Botts Court. I think we need some comic relief here, okay? So, Mr. President, I'd like 1 minute for every $1,000 I pay in taxes, and that I could say whatever I want, but I don't think you're going to give me that. So I'm going to use my own timer, okay? Is that good?
If it agrees with mine, sure.
Okay. I want to, obviously I'm speaking in opposition to the surplus issue, and I want to specifically talk about facts and process. And in many, many respects, what I'm going to say is probably going to echo the letter from Barbara Clary. I think your role as a city council is pretty tough. I think you're given the responsibility to weigh the validity of this proposal, to ensure that it meets the city's goals, and that it also protects the public interest. And in some respects, I feel badly that you're being put in a position to weigh evidence. This is not a court of law. This is a city council. And in a perfect world, I think that could have been different if the proposal had been shared with the public well beforehand, with ample opportunity for review outside of this city council chamber. And that if it had been fully baked with consistent facts and figures, and that it had been presented with great veracity. I think it's unfortunate that that didn't happen, and I hope with other projects it does. So I think you're being put in a position, I'm going to cheat a little bit. I had it 5 minutes. I think you're being put in a position where you really have to know who you're going to believe, because there's a lot of contradictory stuff that's been said tonight, 2 weeks ago, and the week before that. So who are you going to believe? Well, I know you certainly want to believe the city administration, and you should, because they're bringing this project forward for your approval. There are a lot of suits in the room because there's so much contention about this, so you certainly want to believe them because, you know, you're paying them to sit in the room and give you their expert advice. And I hope you also want to believe what you're hearing from the neighbors and the citizens. Because although these people are not being paid to be in this room, I think you would all agree that they're approaching this with great professionalism. And in some cases, we have professionals who are even higher than those professionals. So you're really in a position where you're going to have to weigh the evidence. And it is evidence. There are major differences that we've been talking about for three city council meetings. The differences are about the economics, how much we get, how much it costs. There are clear differences in environmental risk. I mean, today was a good example of that. Parking, do you need parking? Some people here say the parking is really needed. Property values, which have been addressed in the frequently addressed questions that came out 3 hours after the last meeting, there was actually a statement made that the property value may increase by this proposal. We certainly didn't hear that tonight. Suitability of the project and zoning. And so these are major, major differences. I think when you weigh this, I want you, and everything you've heard, I want you to keep an open mind and to listen with an objective ear and a non-biased look at what's ahead of you. I am the first one to say that I love living in Salem. I've lived here for 10 or 11 years. I love the city. I try to give back to the city as much as I can. I think that we're very much on the right road. I think Salem is fiscally solvent. I think that businesses are being strongly supported and growing. And I think that developers come into Salem and want to do projects. All of that is very good. However, somewhere along this road, this proposal is shouting out to me that not all development is good, and not all smart growth is smart. I have 1 more minute. Is that okay on mine?
Not actually, but please wrap
Okay.
up.
So I believe this development is neither good nor smart, and in fact, it's not neutral. It's harmful. I think you've heard a lot of testimony tonight about the harm to health and the welfare, to the fact that the NRCC corridor improvements may very well stop with this, that it is a threat to the historic neighborhood, and I believe that there is a question about the credibility of public trust. Thank you. I don't know how that happened.
Careful reading.
Jim Carney, 1.5 Cambridge Street, Salem, Mass. Our leaders have mentioned being surprised at the hostility that this proposal has surfaced. As I recall, there were neither hearings nor discussions from the time that the RFP closed in March until just after the election in November. Then it seemed to be a rush to hold a public hearing in December. A single hearing for 4 substantive issues all in one night. That didn't happen because of the busy holiday season, and it was finally scheduled again all on one night in January. As we are witnessing, that is dragging out into multiple weeks, and here we are at the end of February. There are also assertions that a campaign of misinformation was being raised. All the while, the supporters were claiming that the proposal would clean up the site, but Webb's proposal said that it was planning to remediate only the footprint under the building and only from low occupancy, 16.8 hours per week, to high occupancy. Not exactly clean. And we've heard tonight from EPA that it's not going to be clean. Additionally, Webb modified their proposal on 1228 to require a TIF in the aggregate amount equal to the environmental remediation cost. Also, Winter Island supporters have impugned the motives of the neighborhood, calling the Federal Street Neighborhood Association the Federal Street NIMBY Association, saying that they just wanted a nice view of the river and to have a free parking lot at taxpayers' expense. There was no mention of the wind turbine that they deemed inappropriate for their backyard. And why do we have to rely on a Salem taxpayer like Chuck Von Bruns to get a discussion going on the economics of the proposal? Nelson Benton would no doubt call him an obstructionist. If you have a different opinion, are you an obstructionist? A Winter Islander who spoke out against the wind turbine obstructionist? And why, if we taxpayers are on the hook for the remediation cost and the RFP has been closed for almost a year, do we still not have those costs defined? Did Webb's bid even comply with the RFP? The RFP stated that the property was being sold as is. Don't the conditions that Webb has placed on their bid require a new RFP? Some people have said that if you don't want businesses to build in your neighborhood, you should have thought twice about buying or renting in a commercial zone. While some recent buyers actually believe the NRCC's master plan that the city also adopted that stated, the city of Salem has recognized the true potential of this area to contribute directly to the quality of the life of the surrounding neighborhoods and the community as a whole. The Federal Street neighborhood includes some of, this is again all from the NRCC overview. The Federal Street neighborhood includes some of the oldest homes in Salem and has maintained a fine historic character. Mason Street currently is the transition point from the commercial and light industrial uses to the south to predominantly residential uses and fine urban streets to the north. It also mentions that the city should encourage development projects that preserve the unique historic character and scale of the adjacent neighborhoods and which take advantage of its waterfront location. Use zoning to encourage desired quality improvements, or quality development that respects the quality of life provided by the existing neighborhoods. It recommends that it includes quality sidewalks, well-developed areas on both sides of the street, consider parking, coordinate with Mass Highway in the court, include buildings that are of similar footprint and in mass as some of the larger old homes on Federal and Essex Streets, and consider artist live work housing at the Webb Building. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else, again, people who have not yet spoken?
Good evening, Barry Neely, 15 Line Street. I'm here, I want to support getting that surplus property. It is a surplus property, we all know that. I retired years ago, I drive a taxi, and one of the places that we would park would be in there because of the limited parking at the MBTA would park, and it would be the only car in there at night. It's not well used, it's not well done. I think what this council's got to do is, let's get back to the basics. First of all, is it a surplus property or not? Let's argue about Webb later down the road, who goes in there. But is it surplus? Can we make more money from it by selling it out? Or are we going to make more money for the taxpayer keeping it as a parking lot? Ride by it any time of day or night, and you'll see it's not making the money. It don't even make the upkeep for the plowing and the cleaning and everything else. So I think the first step is, let's make it a surplus property. Then let's go to our board over there. Let the mayor put out RFPs, requests for proposals, and see what goes in there. I've heard a whole bunch of arguments. They want to keep it as a parking lot. Okay, so let's go the same route as Salem State. What we'll do is we'll put a 6-story parking garage there. So now we get our money at the same time, and we keep it capped. Now, as far as all this talk about diseases and everything else, you scare the heck out of me living in Salem. I live on Lynn Street, right up the street from it. Anywhere you want to put a shovel in the dirt, Salem, Peabody, anywhere you want to do it, put a shovel in the dirt, dig down 10 feet, you're going to come up with the same results. What are we doing to the companies that we're trying to draw into this city if they got to go through this every time they want to expand or come in? They know. I will give you a perfect example. We're Valve right now. I've heard the gentleman say, yeah, the financial consideration was let them move out. That's the best option. Where's Valve? Employs 100 people right now. They're over in Ipswich. They moved out of Salem, and their ads are in the paper every day looking for employees. People from the Point, people from everywhere in Salem could use those jobs. As far as using web industries by themselves, I kind of like having a business like that. I see nothing but good neighbors out of them. There's been no problem with parking. We get into that. Yeah, but like I say, that's down the road. Let's find out if it's surplus property first, then take the step, put out the RFP. Maybe somebody wants to build a 10-story condominium, or God forbid, a parking garage. These people want parking there instead of a show place? Well, let's put a 10-story parking garage up there. It seems to me that would make everybody happy, except for driving the piles. I want to get into the diseases they mentioned. Like I say, you can drive a shovel in the dirt in Peabody, Salem, even over the line of Marblehead. Everywhere you put, even our parks. Look at our parks. We go to redo a park, and all of a sudden it's all full of contaminated dirt. We're paying for our past mistakes. And there's no way we're going to attract development by putting these people through a process like this every time they want to put a foundation in the dirt. I'm a 30-year iron worker. I'm the first person in on a job when a foundation's built. I've had to wear the Tyvek suit. They've told us to wear the mask while we're there. I hear the diseases that are coming up. I've got a cancer. But my God, I can't say it's because of this one reason. Has anybody done a comparison on the national averages or even the city averages? Look at the Salem Powerhouse, what we're doing down there. You telling me that ain't contaminated dirt? But they didn't go, they went through a whole hearing process. But this is, I'm sorry, but talking with the lay people, which is the blue collar people that brought up the city of Salem all my life, this is just a direct slap in the face of NIMBY, and that's how everybody feels that I have talked to that will not come up here. It's a NIMBY. Do not put it in my backyard. Like I say, they want a parking thing there, we'll put a parking thing there. Make it 10 stories. On the reverse end of that, how many of these people would be in this room if Salem said, we're going to build a park out of that? How many of these people would be in this room if we were going to just take the asphalt out of there and make a park, and we had to disturb the dirt the same way? But we were going to make it a pleasure park for them with swing sets and so on. How many people would be here then? This affects my tax rate and everything else. There's people in other parts of the city, and NIMBY is a favorite word. We've got to get rid of that. I think the whole thing is you guys got to decide first is let's not just give it to Webb. Make it what it is. It's not paying for itself the way it is. Just declare it surplus. Put out the proposals, and let's see what comes in after that. Nowadays, all these scientists and everything, nowadays, all the sites I've been on, the EPA has come so far in mitigating the damages that surround the neighborhood. This construction worker, he knows there's ways to keep that in. It's what you do after that. But please, it is surplus. It's a wasted piece of land that we're paying to clean up and all the time. Let's declare it surplus and then go from there. One step at a time, baby steps. Stop taking the giant steps. And if we don't do it, I'm going to tell you what, 10 councils that are going to be sitting here, are going to be talking about tearing that asphalt up for a hotel or something else. Hopefully, the way we're moving, they're going to want to put, somebody's going to come in and want to put something up there. It's going to be repeated again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Neely. Any other persons wish to speak on this matter at this point? Thank you.
I am Janine Helen. I live at 150 North Street. I don't live in the neighborhood, but I know a lot of my friends and neighbors are really concerned about it. And I just hope that everyone, when they vote their conscience and whatever, and everything, that listen to the people of Salem and what they want. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any others who have not yet spoken on this wish to have a turn? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ann Whittier. I live at 10 River Street, and I have a summary here, and I think you've probably all heard enough, and you probably don't want to sit through any more, but, so I thought I'd just pick out one or two points. I wanted to address the gentleman, unfortunately, he left, but I did want to say to you folks, as far as NIMBYs go, I consider myself, I think, a blue-collar worker. My husband and my son are carpenters. They work banging nails all day long. And I'm a contract worker, and anyway. So I don't consider myself an elitist at all. I also had a question earlier in the evening where this is a meeting, I think, to declare the land surplus, but there were representatives of the city who were speaking about, well, Webb's driveway will go here, and the cars will go in and out, and it seems to me that that's kind of jumping ahead a little bit. We haven't declared the land surplus. So I'm going to say, despite all that we've heard over the last two meetings here, from the mayor and representatives of Webb, it still seems clear to me that the negatives of this project far outweigh the proposed development. We've heard expert testimony on the levels of pollutants, how these toxins will once again be reintroduced into the air. We have seen how inappropriate, really, this design is, bumped up against the McIntyre Historic District. I'm lucky enough to live there. I appreciate it. I don't want to keep anybody out, but I don't want to ruin it either. The city's RFP clearly states that any planned construction must be compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. This plan is not. We've heard testimony as to the 15% loss in home value abutters will suffer if this goes forward. These are homeowners who have paid their taxes in good faith for 40 years or more, with the reasonable expectation that their city will not undermine their desire to have a successful life in Salem. We have seen images of the flooding. Well, we didn't see the images, but there's flooding that occurs nearly every month now. We all know that. And really, March 10th, be down there. Come down, we'll have a party and we'll look at it. But we're told by the representatives of Webb and tacitly by the mayor to expect no fluvial movement of contaminants that lie beneath that hot top cap, even with this flooding. We have a centuries-old footpath adjacent to this site, this brownfield site, that leads rustically into the McIntyre Historic District. Why couldn't that be developed along with a parking lot that would lead tourists onto their tour of this pedestrian-friendly city? You know, park there, start your walk up through. Go to Chestnut Street, it's right over there. We've spoken to workers in the courthouses who praise the availability of new parking at this location and predict that up to 140 drivers will be there every day to park when the new courthouse opens. In fact, in light of the still standing health risk assessment that says no one should spend longer than 16 hours per week on the site, parking is the only solution. You drive in, you get out of your car, and you leave. And now we have heard from a climate scientist who speaks about this location, how it's ground zero for sea level rise. The good Lord may not want it, but this creek will rise. And when that happens, where will Webb go? They won't stay. I bet their business plan does not call for it long-term in this site anyway. They must know what's coming down the road. So, but against all this, we have the mayor and the city representatives in Webb who insist that this site is surplus and its best use is for construction of a gargantuan tin box wholesale retail Webb facility. All I can do is wonder why.
Thank you.
My name is Jane Stoffer. I live at 28 Beckford Street. And all I want to say is that I agree with what's been said by all my neighbors, and please do not declare this surplus.
Thank you. Any further members of the public wish to speak on? Okay.
My name is Patty Roca. I live at 3 Lynn Street in Salem. I haven't spoken on this issue at all to this point because I feel like there's been a lot been said. We bought our property in 1989, and over the 25-plus years that we've been in Salem, it feels as though The parking lot that's there right now is the most productive, helpful, and attractive use that we've had in years of a scourge of Universal Steel, and I guess we don't really know what will happen when Webb takes over. I know that you must feel pretty embattled at this point, and I hope that you will really take into consideration the numerous red flags that have come up, because we don't have to take this option. I would very much like to see Webb stay in Salem. I feel as though, as an architectural designer, there are so many architects, designers, and builders, and people in our city who will help you figure out what to do with your home and how to renovate and build, and that Salem has a really interesting opportunity to be a destination shopping place for design. Landry and Arcari has upped its game. Years ago, Waters and Brown upped its game. Tri-City renovated. We've got DeLand Lighting. It would be really nice to have a showroom for plumbing, but it doesn't need to be there. And I do understand that we would like to use up some of the properties that feel not at full potential for the city's properties, but it could go on a private property and we would still get taxes and we would get the benefit of having their business here. And I'd really appreciate if you'd think about it that way, rather than letting it go there. There's been an awful lot of red flags, and I've heard an awful lot of smart, educated people on both sides working hard to try to figure this out. So please vote well.
Thank you. The other members of the public who have not yet spoken would like to speak on this? Sure. You spoke in the previous, not in the previous meeting, so.
My name's Dan Madigan. I live at 14 River Street. I did speak previously on the issue of zoning, so I wish to speak again about about surplus.
Mm-hmm.
The property in question on Bridge Street and Beckford Way should not be declared surplus. Though municipal law may not mandate a public hearing on declaring a city-owned property surplus, I truly appreciate us being given the opportunity to weigh in light of the next most relevant issue that could approach our most pressing concerns, being zoning, and that was already closed. And I honestly don't think that the issue of zoning was addressed fairly. You have heard from the EPA and other environmental groups on what I believe is the most important issue. It is clearly unfortunate we could not hear from the EPA on their specific comments related to the proposed development earlier than tonight. We are incredibly fortunate to have not only good neighbours who are good people, but who are also very competent and capable professionals who are highly educated, and they have proffered relevant information on construction and environmental issues. I'm sure you can understand my personal bias in siding with my neighbours instead of what I have heard from the other professionals. My neighbours are people who are medical and environmental professionals, and they recall the uncontrollable dust blown over the entire neighbourhood during the most recent clean-up, and they are familiar with the real-life building site conditions. It's not like you're performing surgery when you're in a building site. It's actually a little more messier than that. The town's current use of the site as a parking lot is optimal, given the EPA's judgment that it does not pose an environmental risk, as the tarmac successfully contains harmful PCBs and toxic carcinogens. Parking is a very tangible public benefit that should not be discounted in light of this property's location. Though we may not appear to currently have a parking problem in Salem, this will likely change in the near future. The probate courts reopening in the near future will clearly demand more parking spaces, and the MBTA's near future plan to repair the Salem-Beverly Railway Bridge implies more commuters will drive to Salem from points north. Taking away the Bridge Street parking lot will max out the MBTA lot and force many drivers to roam Salem for any available space, creating traffic congestion. Any reasonable cost-benefit analysis should prioritize the health of the surrounding neighbourhood and young children as foremost, along with the site's potential revenue in its current form as a car park. So, okay, you're taking the human issue and you have to take the dollar and cents issue. I know that you are all entrusted with a very large, burdensome responsibility. There is a fiscal hole. The site wasn't paying taxes for a decade or more, and you've got to make it profitable. You've got to do what you've got to do. But I ask of you to please weigh the facts as justly as you can. Because on the other side is to accept I have a lot of respect for Webb. I truly believe they are a good company, but I have to say I believe that the figure of $100,000 per year is conjectured. And this is after a TIF agreement that may not ensure revenue for the city for a decade or more after construction. Though I hope that FW Webb will stay in Salem, and I have no grievance against FW Webb as a company or a neighbour, I simply believe that their vision for a combined retail store and a warehouse belongs elsewhere. And again, I just want to say I very much appreciate the council going through this marathon of hearings, and I truly believe that more could even be said because it is a very important issue. And I hope that you will listen to your constituents. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else who has not yet spoken wish to speak? You spoke at the previous one.
No, I spoke to process, not to substance.
You addressed the council at the previous meeting, and we have another person, a member of the public, who would like to speak to the matter. Name and
My
address
name's
for the
Tom
record.
Frary. I live at 106 Federal Street. I'm not in favor of declaring this land as surplus because I really don't, I haven't heard anybody tell me what the city's definition of surplus is. And a wise man once told me, Tom, God ain't building any more land, so I don't know how there could be any surplus land. So please don't designate it as such. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members who have not spoken? Councilor Epley.
If there's no one else that has not already spoken on this particular hearing, Mr. President, I move that we close the public hearing.
Councilor Epley moves to close the public hearing.
Excuse me, there is someone who wishes to speak.
I withdraw it. I just, if anyone has
Withdrawn.
not.
Sure.
Thanks very much. I appreciate all of you being on the hot seat here and listening to
Name and address for
everything
the
we have
record
to
first,
say.
please.
Pardon me?
Name and address for the record first.
Katie Brayton, 141 Federal Street. And I just want to say that I adamantly oppose the possibility of this being declared surplus. And I'm very concerned about the fact that it will be no longer residential, but it will be zoned differently. I think it should remain, the zoning should remain the way it is, which is R2. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Carr, you chose to use your speech, your time then, no? Mr. Carr, you chose to use your speech about process in the previous.
Because I had to. Because
No,
I
Councilor-
had to, because there was an
Councilor Epley.
outrage.
Mr. President, I move that we close this public hearing.
Councilor Epley moves to close the public hearing. Do I have a second on that? Seconded by Councilor Gerard. Under discussion?
Discussion. What I would like to speak to is if anybody comes forward with new information, that should reopen the public hearing. If the administration or developers come forward with more information, then then people should have a right to speak on that.
I would remind you, Councilor, that we have that once this is referred back to the City Council, we will be having committee hearings on it, and we will be once again open to the public at that point as well. So, Councilor Epley?
No further discussion.
Thank you. Councilor Lovett.
Mr. President, I'd just like to allow Mr. Carr to speak. He's here. He's worked very hard on the project, whether you believe his side is right or wrong. I think he has an opportunity to speak, and I think to allow him 5 minutes is not going to really hurt this council, and I would I would ask the
Councilor
council
Ripley.
to allow him to speak.
I would object to that, and it's not, it has nothing to do with the speaker. It has to do with us only, we've been dealing with this public hearing for 2 full meetings. And and that's going through an entire list of people, both pro and con, and listening to those individuals once. The only exception to that.
Sir, with all due respect to what the councillor said, I object to what he just said. Sir, there were procedures. It was not fair for the proponents to talk first for an hour and a half
Mr.
before
Don-
they spoke this evening.
Mr. Donegan,
It was not
please.
fair, sir.
Mr. Donegan, please. Councilor, please proceed.
Mr. President, on this public hearing specifically concerning surplus, my recollection is that in terms of the individuals of the public who have spoken either for or against the proposal, we're limited to 1 speech. The only exception to that, I believe, was Ms. Firth, who spoke as an individual in one date, and then tonight as president of Historic Salem Incorporated. If we keep this open for, whether it's Mr. Carr or anyone else, we're going to be here for another 3 or 4 nights on this one public hearing. That's not what process is about, in my opinion. We have 3 more public hearings concerning this overall project, and so I think by closing this hearing, there are plenty of opportunities. And to go along with what my at-large counselor said, if there is additional information, there's nothing stopping individuals from providing the city clerk with information that the city council can take into consideration when we deliberate either in committee or as the full city council in a city council hearing. So there's plenty of opportunity, but just this particular portion of the public input, we've gone 2 meetings. We should close it.
Councilor Ryan.
I disagree. I think if anyone wants to speak, I think just let them speak. I went through meetings with the Board of Health where they time people, and it was not a good process. And I think if someone wants to speak, and we're spending more time debating this, then just let them speak. I mean, like Councilor Lovely said, I mean, they put a lot of time into it. You might as well let them go on.
Councilor Lovely.
Just briefly, I think you set the ground rules saying that each individual could speak once and only for 5 minutes. I don't know that we've had a vote that we went, I went along with that. I didn't challenge that. I hope that we give everybody an opportunity to speak. There's no ground rules that I'm aware of, other than the ones that you said, that people will be able to speak once for 5 minutes. I would say that anybody who wants to speak, as Councilor Ryan says, we should give them that opportunity. If they begin to stray beyond the lines, I think you have the gavel in your hands, and I think you get the support of the council.
I would say in the public hearing process, the ground rules that are customarily used allow people to only speak once in the course of that. That's normally the case when we've participated in public meetings at the state level, and we've generally followed that practice at the city council in public hearings that I can recall in my 4+ years of tenure at this point.
I have
If
to
any-
disagree. There's no rule regarding public hearing limits. It was your setting the agenda, which I found admirable. However, there are people here that may want to speak, and I think they should be allowed to do so. That's what we're here for, to listen to them, and we should do so.
And we did, I will just reiterate the point that we did open this up to the entire room and just spent approximately, and I'm sure that somebody in the room is timing it more exactly than I am, approximately 2 hours and 15 minutes in public testimony during the course of this. That was after we heard from the EPA and LSPs. And that was in addition to the several hours that we'd spent in the prior meeting a couple weeks ago. Councilor Sargent.
Thank you, Mr. President.
I would encourage somebody to move the question, sure.
I just would like to remind you that every meeting we've had has been begun by the proponents, the people in favor of this, in which they've been able to speak for, in many cases, an hour before anybody got to speak at all. So it might not be unfair for the people that are opposed to it to be able to elect maybe one leader that would be able to speak for 5 minutes in a rebuttal. But clearly, the people in favor of this has got way more time, way more PowerPoint presentations, different teams coming in, and I don't think it'd be unreasonable for the people on the other side to have not even a team, just one person be their spokesperson and speak for a few minutes. I remember Mr. Carr spoke before, and it was about the procedure, about having to sign up and different things that were going on, so I don't think it'd be unreasonable. There's only one more person that wants to speak.
Councilor Fumiko.
Following that, though, is there anybody else who would want to speak a second time as well?
There we go.
Okay. I'd be okay with allowing it this time.
Make a motion to Mr. Carr will speak.
If we already
All right, well,
wait, can I ask?
Councilor Gerard, sure.
Thank you, Mr. President, just procedurally. So if we already closed the public hearing, then what do we do?
We have not yet closed it. We have a
No, I
motion on the
seconded.
floor. Yeah, but it has not been.
Okay, but we haven't voted. Okay, thanks.
If somebody is willing to withdraw said motion for the moment, then we can allow Mr. Carr a couple of minutes to have a second bite at the apple. Meanwhile, Councilor Epley.
I'll withdraw the motion, but to my colleagues, I would just stress, we need to follow a process. We don't need to have people speaking a second time, at least as a general rule. But I'll withdraw my motion.
All right, so said, Mr. Carr, you have your minutes.
Thank you very much. In fact, first of all, John Carr, 7 River Street. I am a lifelong resident of Salem. In fact, tomorrow I will celebrate my 67th anniversary of being a lifelong resident of Salem. And in terms of Councilor Epley's opinion, all we ask through the public hearing process that it be fair and even-handed. And the number of times that the mayor, representatives of Webb, have been allowed to speak, not subject to a 5-minute limitation, but in many instances each evening going on for hours, same speakers saying...
Mr. President, I'm going to object because the issue is surplus, not process.
Yeah, Mr. Carr, I believe you spoke to process in the previous public hearing. Let's do that.
I'm opposed to the universal site being declared surplus. Why? Because it's not under any credible definition of surplus. It's a permanently capped, heavily contaminated site that the city badly needs so as not to subject the surrounding neighborhood to any kind of risk. And I haven't heard anything tonight whereby Ms. Teaser, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, or Mass DEP is going to guarantee that there will be no risk. One risk is too many. At the same time, it provides 112 badly needed parking spaces that will project competitive revenue. Now, forget the 10-year averages. What we've heard initially by the mayor, 90,000 projected revenue. We have an email to that effect from my own city councilor. Over the next few public meetings, that's one of the many numbers that seem to be moving that we hear from the administration. But taking her at her original word, that parking revenue of $90,000 will be offset by the $83,000 that we project from parking. Remember that you all have seen the actual counts for the 2 months thus far and the average daily use. This month alone, right up and including today, is 76 cars. Now, if you look at that 7,000 delta between the projected real estate tax revenue from Webb, whenever it's going to start to be received, and the 83,000 parking revenue that we project, it's a delta of 7,000, more than offset by the 15% adverse effect on property values of the surrounding neighborhood. Now, we got that from a professional real estate appraiser. His name is Steve Ozahowski. He would be here tonight, but tonight he's before the Wyndham Selectmen, being confirmed as the Wyndham Town Assessor. He will be here in future evenings. Now, look at how they do things in Marblehead. You cross over the Forest River, you see a sign immediately to the left. It says 3 things on it. Lead mills, next line, 4.2 acres, next line, conservation land. That land was heavily contaminated. If this were in Salem, this administration would probably have 5 or 6 towers and who knows how many units and what kind of units. But in Marblehead, they recognize, even on waterfront property, that there are some things you don't mess with. And what is that but a beautiful amenity for the city? The argument that this was always considered to be a temporary solution. Well, you know what? The AUL is not a loosey-goosey document. And the language of it is, and I guess Mass DEP standards are higher than EPA's, it is a permanent solution with no risk to human health. That's what it says. That's what it says. But anyway, and we've heard stories that it was always considered to be temporary. Well, you know, how many times in life do you start a project, you make certain assumptions about what you're going to run into over the course of the project, you get into it, then you learn stuff, and suddenly you realize, whoa, there are things that you never originally realized, and we need to change direction. I don't remember it the way the mayor remembers it, but even if you buy into that, you know what? We've heard an awful lot. We as neighbors now realize a whole lot more environmentally than we ever thought. Less than a minute. You know, we as a neighborhood don't have options. Webb has options. With all due respect to the cab driver, who I guess has left, you know, one option is for Webb and whole or in part to bifurcate their services and move elsewhere in the city, to areas that are zoned for that use, which have no risk of environmental contamination or cleanup. But there's another risk. The Webb 5-story building was never in industrial use. It was always storage. There's no contamination underlying it, and there's no contamination on the other side. Why not bifurcate and build their 13,000 square foot warehouse on the other side, which has land to accommodate it, maintain the parking lot as a parking lot and the permanent cap, and they benefit. It will also allow them to redevelop the upper floors as they have proposed. And then finally, I would you know, well, again, it's process related, so I won't go back. Thank you very much for your consideration, and thank you, Councilor Epley, for withdrawing your motion.
Thank you. Councilor Epley.
I renew my motion to close the public hearing.
Councilor Epley moves the public
I second
hearing be closed, seconded by Councilor Gerard. Seeing no further discussion. All those in favor? All those opposed? So moved. Councilor Epley.
If it's the will of the body, the recommendation is to refer this to the next council meeting for approval. My recommendation would be that this stay in the committee of the whole.
Well, we refer it back to we have to refer it back to the city council, at which point we would send it to appropriate committee from the city council, so. Referred to back to the city council.
My motion would be to refer it back to the to the city council for dissemination to an appropriate committee.
Okay. Councilor Epley is moving that this be referred to the next city council meeting for disposition. All those, seconded by Councilor Gerard. All those in favor?
Wait.
What?
But disposition means we're selling it.
No, for us to disposition on the matter. For us to decide what to do with it as a matter.
It's the surplus and disposition is also selling land, so we gotta.
We're not, don't worry, it's not. So, for, on the motion to refer it back, all those in favor? Oppose? So moved. Now, obviously, it is 9:30 something. We're not going to actually get going on discontinuance, which is the next matter. So I would ask, while we have the council here, Councilor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the public hearing on the discontinuance of the public way known as Beckford Way be continued to whatever date everyone's willing to continue it to.
Well,
I mean, obviously, this is procedural. We have to continue it to some date.
Yeah,
so,
we have to continue it to a date certain.
So, at your leisure, I mean, I'm just trying to move this along so we all can get out of here.
I will, I will say, referring to my, just referring to my own schedule and some some work travel obligations I will have. The next possible date we could go to would be March 9th, and barring that, the following week of March 14th, Monday the 14th, or anything in the week following that, before we have our city council meeting, Tuesday 22nd or Wednesday 23rd. Any of those would be, Mayor?
The 9th seems to work.
I just want to point out one issue of timeliness with respect to the zoning timeline.
Zoning's already back in city council, so.
Right, but there's a deadline with
Yes.
which the council must act under.
Yes.
So they're all interrelated, so my understanding of the deadline, according to the statute, is that the council has to act by April 25th, which would mean if you were sticking to your regular meeting schedules, first passage would have to happen prior to March 24th, or.
Correct. Should we pass it, we would have to do first passage by the end of March. But we already have zoning into committee at this point. We disposed that into committee at the last city council meeting, so we just have to schedule the committee meeting for that. That's separate from this.
Great, just wanted to raise
Yep.
that since they're all
Sure.
interrelated.
Thank you. So is there anybody in the body have any of those particular dates work better or not work? Councilor McCarthy?
I move that we move to March 9th.
Wednesday?
Yes.
Wednesday at 6? 6:30?
So Councilor McCarthy moves that we continue the public hearing to Wednesday, March 9th.
Relative to Beckford Way.
Relative to Beckford Way. Does that work for everybody? All right, so
6:30?
6. 6 o'clock?
I would suggest 6 as probably a better time to shoot for.
At 6 o'clock.
So Councilor McCarthy moves that, that the public hearing on the discontinuance of Public Way be continued to date certain of Wednesday, March 9th at 6 p.m. All those in favor? Opposed? So moved. On the conveyance of 297 Bridge Street, 1260 square feet, known as Parcel B, to Sun King LLC for the sum of $10,001.
President,
Yep.
could we just make a request to the public, if we could just sit tight for just
Yeah.
literally 2 minutes?
Please just let us get through our procedural issues. Parcel B to Sun King LLC for the sum of $10,001 with the permanent pedestrian vehicular access on the entire parcel for the benefit of 3032 Beckford Street. Councilor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. President. I further move that this matter be referred to the meeting on March 9th at 6 p.m.
Councilor McCarthy moves that this be referred to, continue to the public meeting on March 9th at 6 p.m. All those in favor? Opposed? So moved. And finally, we have the public hearing of the City Council on land disposition agreement and convey a portion, 297 Bridge Street, 52,491 square feet, former Universal Steel, and 311 Bridge Street, 2,015 square feet, to Sun King LLC, affiliate of FW Web Company, for the sum of $990,000. Councilor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. President. I further move that this matter be referred to the meeting on March 9th at 6 p.m.
Councilor McCarthy moves this be continued to March 9th at 6 p.m. All those in favor? Opposed? So moved. Councilor Fury.
Motion to adjourn.
Councilor Fury moves we adjourn. All those in favor? Opposed? We are adjourned.